systems analyst who worked with Athens-Clarke County on developing this plan.
Thank you. So for our agenda today, we will present an overview of the final plan draft. We'll start with some information about data collection and the background of this, move into a funding analysis. So looking at your current funding streams and what is potentially available. We'll go in depth on each of the 10 key strategies that were part of this plan, provide a brief overview of the ARPA allocation, talk about evaluation and tracking, and then give some time for ACC Gov to share next steps, and then take any questions people have. So the data collection process for this plan was very much a multifaceted, community-driven approach. We looked at administrative data from numerous different sources and programs. We also conducted interviews with homeless service providers and system partners, as well as people who had lived experience of homelessness, including people who are currently homeless or were very recently housed. We conducted 3 surveys. One was a survey with business partners regarding the impacts of homelessness on the business community. We also conducted a student survey. It was for students over the age 18, so it was primarily with university students, looking at the depth and impacts of student homelessness in the Athens-Clarke County community, as well as a provider survey, getting input on the key strategies of this plan. There were 8 community listening sessions as part of this with a variety of audiences, and this also included as much data as possible from the Home Art Plan, which I know you have already approved. Just to give a little bit of background and level setting about what is happening with homelessness in Athens-Clarke County, there have been increases according to the point in time count every year in Athens-Clarke, and seemingly this is outpacing what is the rate of increase for the rest of Georgia. This does include rises in experiences of unsheltered homelessness, so how many people are living on the streets or other places not meant for human habitation. And this is a very diverse population that includes students, families, people who are fleeing domestic violence and human trafficking, and other populations. There is not currently enough shelter or affordable housing in Athens to meet the need of people who are experiencing homelessness. There are obviously intersections happening with the private rental market, with just rental rates increasing throughout the county and neighboring counties, as well as working with landlords for people who might have barriers to housing. Many of these are also addressed in your affordable housing plan. Likewise, there's gaps in services to be able to, again, meet the emergency needs of people experiencing homelessness in the community.
Can I ask a question back to the pie chart? There doesn't seem to be a percentage for services only or for street outreach. If somebody could get that to us, I'd love to know those numbers.
Oh, that must have copied weird. Dave, could you please look that up real fast?
Thank you.
I'll look that up.
Great. So as part of this plan, we wanted to not just look at the ARPA funds that have an allocation within this strategic plan, but also take a look at the other funding that comes into Athens-Clarke County that either already does or could be used to address the need to prevent and reduce homelessness in Athens. So looking at funds such as CDBG and HOME that do directly flow through Athens-Clarke County as an entitlement, as well as looking at continuum of care and emergency solutions grants funds that are not an entitlement, but rather require competition, either to the state in the case of ESG or to HUD in the case of COC. And so some of those ways of better utilizing those funds include like coordinating for funds to address homelessness and affordable housing development, as well as being able to increase competitiveness by the community for those state and federal funds. So when we look at the plan, next slide, great. As we worked with Athens-Clarke County staff, identified 6 goals within the strategic plan, and then also a number of key strategies, which are those largest, main, first priority strategies that will support the goals in the plan. There are additional strategies that are in the plan as well that don't have quite as much detail or funds allocated specifically to them. But when we look at those goals, I just want to really emphasize those. So the first goal is to strengthen COC capacity or continuum of care. Second goal is to reduce the impact of unsheltered homelessness. The third goal is to improve shelter and transitional housing. Goal number 4 is to increase access to permanent housing. Goal number 5 is to increase housing stability. And then goal number 6, expanding system-wide coordination. So within goal 1, one of the first strategies is to staff the coalition. So there is a homelessness coalition in Athens-Clarke County, as y'all know, that this strategy would really look to have staffing that can support the coordination and also promote independence of the COC within the coalition. So currently Athens-Clarke County government serves as the collaborative applicant, and there's a desire to have that be based more so in the community, is what we learned. And so in order to a couple of things. So one is to really improve the performance of your system in terms of shortening the length of time that people are experiencing homelessness, reducing their returns to homelessness, increasing income, maintaining permanent housing. There are a lot of pieces that go into that that involve a lot of coordination of folks across the community. So the role of the COC and the planning staff are really to bring together all the folks in the COC around these common goals and visions and really coordinate a lot of the services. There is also a lot of regulatory and administrative pieces to running a COC that involve doing an annual competition for funding, as well as submitting reports, ensuring that there is a functioning coordinated entry, many things that we will not delve all the way into right now. But with having that staff, they would be able to focus on building that trust and creating a shared vision that would ultimately help the community to be more competitive for both federal funds, as well as begin to pursue philanthropic and other dollars that might exist. And so with this, ACC has decided on an allocation of $400,000, which is approximately 9% of the entire ARPA allocation.
Thanks, Heather. I can go back at the end, but I do have an answer to the previous question. It was 74% services only and 6% street outreach. Key strategy number 2, increasing participation from people with lived experience, is really about sharing decision-making power with people who are currently or have exited homelessness. So this is a HUD requirement. But beyond that, it is also something that has been shown in research to create more effective programs. The allocation for this is $30,000, and the key principles are really helping to be clear about roles. So what is the role of a lived experience committee or working group, whatever role, whatever form that takes in the community? Being sure to compensate people for their time, making this not necessarily like a full-time job, but really ensuring that contributions are valued monetarily. And again, giving that meaningful power sharing through decision-making domains, ability to have a meaningful voice in program design and policy, and taking the time to ensure that people understand the rules and regulations that they are operating within. Homeless services is incredibly complex on a policy level, and oftentimes there's local and state nuances to that. So really helping people be able to show up as knowledgeable as they are able to. Turn it back to Heather.
Great. So I already alluded to the need to improve coordinated entry policy and implementation. So coordinated entry is a requirement of HUD, and so that includes multiple pieces such as access, prioritization, assessment, and case conferencing. And there is a lot of work that can be involved in creating a coordinated entry that really meets the needs of humans that are experiencing homelessness in your community. So we did talk with other communities that are doing this work, as well as all of our other work providing technical assistance to various communities. And some key strategies that I'm going to list here, you're also going to see later in this presentation, because really coordinated entry brings a lot of your system together. So some of those key strategies include, using a by name list and case conferencing. So we know who all of the people in our community are who are experiencing homelessness, and we're able to discuss what they need and what is the ideal housing for what they need and want. With referrals to permanent supportive housing, making sure that you are staying in touch with them the whole time to be able to get their documentation and verification ready so that as soon as there is a unit available, folks can move right in. Integration of diversion, which we will talk more about, as well as connection to shelter. Use of HMIS is, or the Homeless Management Information System, is a really effective way of ensuring that everybody is connected across these many different organizations. Making sure that you have sufficient staffing to oversee all of these different pieces that we have discussed here, from diversion to case conferencing to referrals, all of that. And then most importantly, one thing that we have heard is just not letting perfect get in the way of progress. So making sure that you're continually putting things into practice, evaluating, and continuing to improve that beyond just saying we can't put anything into place until it is absolutely perfect. Once we put it into place, we're done. Job over. And so with improving coordinated entry, there is an allocation of $350,000.
Thank you. The fourth strategy is about establishing comprehensive street outreach. So as Heather mentioned, we did talk to a lot of other similarly situated communities as that are outlined in your plan draft. And one of the themes that came up with street outreach is really the importance of having multiple organizations contribute to the effort to really build relationships with people. And so communities with highly coordinated outreach programs were able to engage a broader array of people who are living unsheltered, as well as move people into housing. in a more streamlined way. So this includes structured approaches to teams. So while the behavioral health provider in Athens is doing a fantastic job ensuring that there are other team skills that are being brought to that. Having a central agency that is able to, really take the lead and help organize the community of providers into a predictable schedule so that people living unsheltered know when outreach workers are going to be in specific areas at specific times to connect with people. This really helps build trust, especially with people who perhaps have been more reluctant to engage because of past negative experiences. These teams also use their own form of prioritization, which Heather just mentioned as part of coordinated entry, but having their own priority list for outreach of people that they want to contact, help get document ready, really help push into treatment or, family reunification, whatever the options are for that individual, and tracking that data and outcomes. The proposed allocation for this is $200,000, and that is in addition to the money that has already been allocated to Advantage.
Great. So key strategy number 5 really gets at how do we help move folks who are living unsheltered into permanent housing. And so one strategy that has been implemented in a number of communities, so most recently in Bangor, Maine, who we spoke with, is that of using a housing central command tactic for a housing surge. So with that, you are really creating a team of teams. So you have folks that are focused on identifying all the folks that are living in an encampment and identifying what their needs are, what their desires are for housing. What is the thing that makes them, that makes a housing situation work for them as an individual human? And then a team that is focused on finding what are those various housing units. So that can include the actual units as well as the subsidies and programs that are required. So building relationships with landlords, which we're going to talk more about, is like a whole, it's a whole thing, right? And so having folks who are focused on that, and then folks who are really focused on moving those eligible households into the units, right? And so with these different teams, you're making sure that you are communicating frequently and consistently focused on action. The idea is that we are not just saying, oh, hey, at some point, at some day, this person is going to get connected to housing, but we have a team, we have plans, we're going to be moving this person, and eventually having every single person in an encampment, whether sectioned or not, moved into permanent housing. And so the proposed allocation for this strategy is $150,000.
Key strategy number 6 is increasing the number of low barrier shelter units. As we mentioned in the background, there are not enough shelter units to be able to meet the needs of everyone experiencing homelessness or fleeing from domestic violence or human trafficking in the Athens-Clarke County area. And some people that we spoke with through this process indicated that shelter that is currently available may have barriers around it that, the times of entry and exit do not work well with their work schedules or their school schedules, or, it's a difficult place to bring children into. And we heard some acknowledgement for providers of this as well, that with current funding available and current facilities, that it was difficult to eliminate some of these barriers. So principles that guide low barrier shelters include configuring the space to meet the needs. So these can be congregate or non-congregate, or have areas that are a mix of both for people who might need more privacy. There are still rules in low barrier shelter, but making sure that those rules are very clear and no more than the minimum is needed, and to be able to use termination or being kicked out of shelter, basically in plain language, as an absolute last resort. This does rely on having sufficient staffing to be able to implement a low barrier shelter model. The total proposed allocation here is $2.2 million, and that could take a variety of forms, from constructing a facility to acquiring and rehabbing an existing facility, or allocating money towards a current shelter project or transitional housing project to become low barrier and expand the number of people they serve.
Great. So on the note of shelter, key strategy 7 is to implement diversion and rapid exit. So with diversion, we are talking about the moment that somebody calls for shelter, we're going to start talking about what are other ways that you do not need to enter the homeless response system, whether that is addressing a relationship that has gone sour with like a roommate or family. Whether that is addressing landlord mitigation issues or relocating to another geographic area, as well as rapid exit. So somebody who does come to shelter, how do we, like, rather than you having to stay in shelter for a long time and await a housing opportunity within the homeless response system that may or may not come, but how can we move you into permanent housing as soon as possible? And so this relies not just on flex funding, but really primarily on the use of motivational interviewing and case management. So that really does require staff that is well trained, well paid. So keeping staff that are there and able to have the time and capacity to have these conversations with folks and prevent any ongoing trauma of remaining in the homeless response system for longer than they need to. And so with this strategy, there is a proposed allocation of $200,000.
And key strategy number 8 is about creating a support fund made up of flexible assistance and services for people to exit homelessness or prevent them from entering into homelessness. So these are pools of resources that can help resolve barriers, so such as paying for application fees, or perhaps you owe the utility company a couple $100s, and that's what's stopping you from being able to get a new place to live, being able to pay off things like that. Many communities have seen great success with these models, and it includes really keeping documentation and requirements quite minimal, so not trying to set up an overly complex program, and having a lot of providers come together to collaborate on what the acceptable uses are going to be. And so there's a lot of available points of entry into this fund. The most successful communities, again, use HMIS, or that homeless management information system, to be able to track clients, understand what's happening. Have people applied for this fund a lot of times over and over again? Is there something more going on there that perhaps warrants more attention than just a check for, maybe $100? There is no additional funding proposed to be allocated to this, as the mayor and commission have already allocated $300,000 for this purpose.
So key strategy 9 is to engage in landlord-focused strategies. And so with this, we are thinking about landlord engagement, risk mitigation, as well as incentives for renting to people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And so a lot of times in our system, we tend to reach out to landlords when we're trying to house a specific human. But with this, like, really looking at how do we develop connections within real estate markets, having those relationships not just with our small mom and mom kind of landlords, but also the big conglomerate landlords as well. And so with that, trying to figure out how do you be collaborative, meeting the needs of both the property management in terms of keeping units full and getting rent paid, as well as ensuring that humans have homes. And then once people are housed in these units, making sure that you're going to sustain those relationships, not just be like, okay, I got somebody in there, job's done, I don't need to keep fostering this relationship. And so landlord-focused strategies can include like both the staffing that is required to do that engagement, could also be risk mitigation funds or financial incentives. And so with all of that, there is a proposed allocation of $240,000.
And last but not least, establishing partnerships for employment. Your business community and Chamber of Commerce, as part of the data collection process, we're very enthusiastic about the idea of collaborating with homeless services to provide access and support for living wage jobs. So this helps create an environment where people are able to potentially resolve their own homelessness or housing instability, or after a period of time on assistance programs such as rapid rehousing that times out, to be able to carry that rent effectively on their own. There are many successful programs, such as vocational rehabilitation programs offered through Goodwill. There have been campaigns such as Ban the Box for felony convictions, that employment programs for people exiting homelessness have modeled themselves after, with other barriers to living wage and stable employment. And so this really involves, again, that the ability to staff these collaborations between employers and employment services, such as vocational rehab and homeless service providers, and to engage again in that case conferencing, understanding what skills people have, what skills people are willing to develop. Perhaps, there's someone who's willing and able to get like a CDL license to be a driver. And co-locating services to the extent possible, so that when people are coming in for housing assistance, that there is someone specialized there who can start working with them on employment as soon as possible. And the proposed allocation for this is $195,000.
Great. And in case you weren't just taking notes along the entire time, we also have a summary of those funds across each of the strategies. It's also included in the final plan with more details, but really breaking down the components of the funding, and both by, like, for some it is salary, for some it is hard materials, such as technology and participant materials, also broken down for those things that are by year 1 or year 2. When we go on to the next slide, we see some things that only have a one-time funding amount because they are a one-time funding thing, such as a housing surge or the development of low barrier shelter units. As Scott said, those shelter units could be acquisition, rehabilitation, modification of existing space, staffing, other shelter operations. So we have one more page of this allocation summary up here. So at the very bottom, we'll also see all other strategies. So after doing this allocation with ACC staff, and kind of looking at what are these things costing typically across other communities, as well as what is a living wage in Athens-Clarke County, realizing that we also had an additional $500,000 with which to address some of those other strategies that were identified by ACC Gov staff as key strategies. And so there are funds there that can be put towards some of those other strategies that were identified within the plan. And so for each of these, it does not need to be a separate RFP, but basically just as we wanted to align those funding amounts to the key strategies as they were researched and detailed within the plan.
The plan also includes a section on evaluation and tracking, so providing suggestions to the community of how you might track outcomes from the plan so that you can really understand the impact, retool, and then build on areas of successes. So to be able to identify those most successful mechanisms for future areas of investment. And as well as the suggestion that as ACC Gov and providers do meet regularly through the continuum of care meetings, reviewing that data frequently and collaborating on what an exact tracking plan might look like. And I think now, I don't know if it's easier to leave my screen up or take it down, but we can take any questions and comments.
Thanks, Scott and Heather. I appreciate it. I certainly have some observations and a couple of prospective recommendations, but I want to get the members of the commission first. So, Commissioner Thorne.
Thank you, Mayor. I do want to go on record again. I did not support this study. I still don't. I don't think there's a whole bunch of new stuff that I heard, but I do have some questions. One. When we talk about, and I think you mentioned it very early on about the growth of homelessness, and we have talked about a lot of things on how people are coming to Athens. You know, what is attracting them to Athens? And I've met with a couple of homeless people who have been here for 6 months. I think one was 6 months and the other one was 2 years maybe. But anyway, they said that on the internet, Athens is listed as one of the best places to live. And I have never heard that before, but I Googled it, and sure enough, we're number 2. So I'm wondering if money should not be allocated, or at least consideration. We should be able to, based on who is here and how long they've been here and where they came from, we should almost be able to predict what the influx will be of people coming here, reading that on the internet. So that's one suggestion. I'm very disappointed that one of the issues is the different groups that are part of the COC not being able to come up with a strategic plan that embraces everything that you have shared with us. I don't know why we have to pay for something that you would assume is being done. As far as the rules, the regulations, what is the barrier with one group to another group. And the last piece, no, I got a bunch of notes, so I'm gonna let somebody else talk, but the other thing, some of the things that you recommended or is in this report about developing relations with landlords, the livable wage, those were things that have been done. And those groups are not, either we didn't listen to them, but you're presenting this like this is a new thing. We have had 2 groups that did just that, built relationships with landlords, built relationships with employers, got people homes, got people off the street. But this presentation looks like this is something brand new. And I am disappointed that I think my colleague mentioned about the street outreach, 6%. If we're talking about homelessness, I can't understand, it's hard to fathom why this would only be 6%. why aren't we talking more to the people that are affected by homelessness? I do think that having a coordinator to work, that is paid to coordinate in some of these initiatives with the groups that are working on homelessness, I think that would be a good investment instead of each homeless group doing their own thing. That's the only thing I really have taken from. Could you also again tell me what are the non-entitlement funding sources are again? I don't think that was new to me. So what are the possible non-entitlement funding sources?
The non-entitlement funding would be the continuum of care funds, as well as emergency solutions grant, which goes to the state of Georgia and is open for competitive application from providers across the state.
Have we in Athens-Clarke County applied? I know about the continuum of care, but with the groups that are working, is there only one agency that is applying for these funds, or is there a collective group that has already applied for these funds in the past?
The COC, the Continuum of Care, is a collective group that makes decisions about funding. Each year, they participate in the competition for COC funds, and there is a certain amount that HUD says that each Continuum of Care can apply for. They put the funds into tiers, tier 1 and tier 2, as well as indicate how much they can apply for a regular bonus and or a domestic violence bonus.
Okay. And the emergency one, what was that one again?
The emergency solutions grants are, you apply to the state based on project, and so someone from ACC Gov might have more specific information, or Heather might be looking into it about how many projects, but part of this plan and part of this section is really about, ACC Gov probably isn't going to be able to necessarily go after that as like a big collective in the same way, but perhaps there are partnerships that could be formed to form a project application, or perhaps the capacity of individual organizations could be supported in a way to go after those funds. And then in regards to the COC funds, as Heather explained, there is an amount of money you can ask for. You can also propose new projects to HUD and get bonus funds. And to our knowledge, Athens-Clarke County has not been awarded the maximum amount of money that you could possibly get, which including those different tiers and bonus funds. And so again, part of this is about
HCD staff has a little bit of input that
all
they can
the
provide. Thanks, Scott.
Just 1 second, Scott. So Commissioner Thornton, just to go back to the Emergency Solutions Grant funding, that ESG funding, there are 2 agencies right now that have applied to the state for that, and they've received that. But in the past, there have been more. So individual agencies apply to that as they need to, or they have the capability to.
So I guess going back to the, because we're definitely in an emergency situation here with homelessness. So I guess my point is, and I would love to see who those 2 agencies were. You can shoot me an email later.
Yes, ma'am.
But it does seem like it is important that we do at least reach out for these funds.
Right, I agree, and I think that's part of the whole bolstering the coalition piece, is to help that collaborative effort to kind of get everyone together to make sure we're all moving forward in the same direction, and being aware of all the different funding sources that are out there. So there may be smaller nonprofits that aren't familiar with it, and they can partner with agencies that have gone through it before to apply for funds for other projects. So that's part of that coordination piece.
Can I also get a copy of the last COC application?
Yes, ma'am. We're actually going through that right now, but I can definitely get you the application from last year.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner, did you want the Cloudburst Group to talk a little bit about that opportunity for a predictive model like you talked about?
Oh, yeah, I would love that. Did anybody have the thoughts?
Scott or Heather, I don't know if you want to address the manner in which we might be able to predict the emergence of new homeless individuals in the community, whether from the community or from elsewhere.
Sure. So I think just addressing this first, not talking about predictive modeling, and then try to answer your question more directly. So the plan does include some information on what resources are in neighboring counties. And your neighbors don't have much, or in some cases any, shelter, transitional housing, homeless service providers, right? So even we did talk to people who were from a nearby area and came to Athens. I can assure you that these individuals did not want to come to Athens necessarily, that, it was a necessity to come to Athens to be able to have any kind of services. So the place where, your continuum of care is at is that you can't prioritize people from Athens. You do have to serve everyone based on their level of need. So even if they came from, another part of the state or even a different state altogether, you can't really by HUD rules take that into account. You do need to serve them. And so, that is something that your local providers do contend with. As your coordinated entry system could be built out, as your continuum can be built out, and programs, there are numerous examples of COCs that coordinate with each other. And so I think part of the question there is how can Athens-Clarke build a better relationship with the Georgia balance of state, which is what is surrounding you basically, for some of these. There's also examples of ways communities share programs, and this actually happens in Atlanta. They have kind of a similar setup where people come into the city for services, and some neighboring counties there actually contribute funds towards shelter and programs, to be able to kind of acknowledge this reciprocal relationship with Atlanta as a service hub. And so what this plan is acknowledging is you can't turn people away just because they're not from Athens. Two, there needs to be an infrastructure really built out within Athens to be able to think maybe about some of these longer term things like those kinds of collaborations. And then specifically in regards to predictive modeling, Cloudburst just did a project with Washington State looking at this. As far as, again, inflow from communities around, I can't speak to that specifically. There are various methodologies looking at, short and long range predictions of the number of people who are maybe experiencing homelessness based on economic indicators, social determinant of health indicators. So that's certainly a vein of work that has been done in the research world.
I guess my point is, and I do appreciate this, and I don't want to sound like I don't. I do appreciate this, this report. And like I said, some of the things in your report has been done. What has not been done is some methodology, because I'm not suggesting that we don't serve homeless people that come here. I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm suggesting is having an idea or a number or something, so when they get here, that those services are intact and in place. That's why, so I'm not suggesting not serving homelessness. I just don't think we're prepared for that, especially if they're looking at the internet and find out Athens is the best place to live. That was my thing.
Gotcha. So, I think to some extent, as you all likely know, that's already happened where, you are serving people, again, from nearby areas. I can't comment on past efforts for the plan. I can say in regards to, the two things that you brought up, which were employment programs and landlord engagement, we did a pretty extensive business survey. It had over 250 responses, somewhere in that ballpark. And business owners definitely did not feel like they knew how to contact the homeless service system or work with the homeless service system or other service providers. And so, you know, maybe that was a while ago and, you know, the players have changed, but I do definitely think that there is room for an effort there. And with landlord engagement, you know, we did hear that some organizations had tried this, and I know the COC put out a survey as we were developing this plan, but it's our understanding that this has never happened in a coordinated, centralized way where all of the providers are sharing resources in a dedicated effort to match units, include, like Heather said, not just small landlords, but also big commercial landlords as well. And so I again do think maybe it's worth a second chance in a different model. And you have a great partner in Open Doors Atlanta, who are, you know, just right up the road, and people in your COC have relationships with them, and they have been extremely, extremely successful in Atlanta with these centralized approaches.
Thanks, Scott. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. I've got a few others. Carol?
Yeah, thank you so much. I wanted to ask about a couple of things. I was looking at some of the statistics in here, and I know people do come to Athens for all sorts of our services, including the homeless people, but I finally found what I was looking for was that the 2023 point in time count showed that only 13% of people living unsheltered had been in Athens-Clarke County for less than 6 months, and half of them had been living in the county for more than 6 years. So people are coming in, but there are also people who've been here for a long time. I did want to ask something about your recommendations that I need clarification on. When I went back and looked at that chart, I was trying to make a little chart of my own over here. It looked to me like the recommendations are for about 7 different positions. I'm very supportive of that position for the coalition position, but when I added up what I was seeing there, am I correct in that there are 7 positions? Is it more than that are being recommended?
Proposed budget.
Proposed?
Yeah.
When you went to that chart down below, and, you know, either way, I mean, you can get me an exact number, because it would be good to know what is being recommended. Some of them, there are some other services in there. You know, I see in one of them, the improved court entryway, that there was salary, plus there was also software and other such things. So one of my concerns here is that this is money for 2 years, and there's a lot of people in there. It's setting up a system, and for us to be able to continue to fund that afterwards, what is that total, the total salary and benefits cost that's being proposed here? And then another question I had, or a point I actually saw in here, another good statistic was that 43% of people reported having a disability, and 14% of people were chronically homeless, meaning they had a disability and had experienced homelessness for at least 12 months. I think that's a statistic that adds to evidence for the need for more permanent housing, permanent supported housing, which is something I'm very much interested in supporting in this. And the last point I wanted to ask was there any outreach or work with faith-based organizations here? I represent the East Side, and there are 2 churches who have reached out to me about what they can do to help with homelessness. And so I'm interested, there doesn't seem to be any incorporation of our faith-based groups that seem eager to help.
Heather, Scott?
Oh, I can respond to the first question about staffing. So I know when we worked on these strategies, you know, we had looked at each one individually as far as the staffing. And so thinking about staffing could be dedicated staff. In some cases, we really would recommend a dedicated staff, but the salaries or staffing could also mean that it is staffing or salaries at other organizations. So something like diversion, you might be saying, hey, we are going to support the work of a case manager at this shelter, and we are going to support the work of this person at this drop-in center, right? So there are many different ways that it could look. So this is relatively flexible in its approach.
And just in terms of that, when we do our SPLOST projects with capital, and put the recommendations in there and they come out, there's always operating expenses that are there so that we know what we're either going to have to absorb into our general budget or other budgets or find other funds for. So I need to know those kind of figures before I could support some of these recommendations here. Anyway, and faith-based, anything with faith-based?
Can I just jump in real
Yeah.
quick on the salary piece? Should you all accept this plan and direct us to release RFPs for these activities or some of them, the idea is that agencies would then, in their proposal, tell us their idea on how they would establish partnerships for employment. They might need just a part-time salary position, or they might just need 10% to complement other funding, or whatever that might be. So it would be hard for us at this point in time to come up with what that salary line item would be.
But for these programs, we don't have any money after 2 years.
Right. The idea also of strengthening the coalition is that it would strengthen us as a community so that we can be more competitive both for federal, state, and philanthropic funding. It would give us about 2.5 years worth of opportunities to pursue those. And so that's the idea as well. We all wish ARPA could go on forever and we could just keep getting in the money, but this is almost it's a stepping stone, right? And sort of establishing these programs. And to Commissioner Thornton's point earlier too, a lot of these programs have existed in some capacity in the past. This plan is really looking as to how can we enhance it, how can we build in all of our key learnings over the last X number of years, and also take advantage of these ARPA fundings that we have right now. So hopefully that helps illustrate that as well.
And did you want somebody to speak, Commissioner, to the faith-based opportunities?
If there was anything in there.
Yes.
I can real quick,
I
or Scott,
can-
real quick, just, I'm Lillian Srnkoski, I'm the homeless specialist over at HCD. The faith-based community has been engaged in our warming shelter planning for this year that we're doing in collaboration with several service providers in town and also with ACC Gov, EMS, police, HCD, Leisure Services, all of these departments as we plan for the coming winters. And Laura Peterson, who's a part of the interfaith community, she is engaged in that and engaging the faith-based community. So there's a start, there's an in there for sure.
Thanks, Lily.
Are there churches of color that are part of this conversation?
I can,
As part of-
sorry, Scott.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just in the conversations that we've had, Laura is a part of a network of several different churches. I can get specific ones for you of the council.
I would like that, and I'll say this, because a lot of times when we do things, it's already going down the track. It's already out the gate, and folk are just invited to get on.
Yeah.
I'd like to know the churches of Hispanic, churches of color, Hispanic and in general, because they need to be a part of these discussions on the front end. That's that. So if you could work that out for me, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely, right, including folks in the conversation early. I hear you.
Okay.
We get input from some others on the body. John?
Yes, a couple of questions. So do y'all have examples of communities where this plan has worked, where you can show us what the homeless population was before this plan was implemented, and then what the population was afterwards, and what the cost associated with that would be?
So, I mean, this plan was created specifically for you all, so I can't say that this exact combination of strategies has been used anywhere, but throughout the plan, there are numerous examples of communities who have implemented that strategy with the statistics of, how many people they were able to divert, that kind of information.
Okay. And then, so the 2.2 million that we're looking at investing in in housing, is that for the county to spend on another encampment or something like that? Or is that investing in existing homeless shelters from providers that already have shelters?
So we would not recommend spending the $2.2 million on another encampment when you have the opportunity to, shelter people with that funding inside. Again, this might take a variety of forms that people have been successful with. So again, it could be if you have, a site in mind that you believe you could acquire for a reasonable price, that can work. We have also heard within the community that perhaps there are places to be rehabilitated, or that homeless service providers in the area had started transitional housing projects that could be expanded with this funding. I believe in the plan there's also some information about things like hotels and motels. There have been success stories coming out of the pandemic in different communities of places that long-term have been able to successfully convert these into permanently affordable housing or permanent supportive housing. So I don't think what we had in mind with that was an encampment rather than predominantly a capital investment.
So you're talking about an investment in existing services, like existing homeless providers, or because you mentioned the county looking at vacant land. Are you talking about a combination, or?
So I don't think $2.2 million would be enough money to do, multiple projects. I think you'd probably get more bang for your buck with one project. But again, we don't want to say that this one way is the only way that it works. We have heard in the community talk of a potential motel site, to just be very specific for a second. We again have also heard from providers potential interest in expanding some of their current projects. So I think, like Alejandra was saying earlier, this would really come down to, just when the RFP is out, discussions with potential bidders of what is going to, based on, the responses that you have available, where is going to be the best value for those $2.2 million.
And I'll note, Scott, and of course, this is embedded in the longer plan that's at the ARPA site on our webpage, that the HOME ARP funds also are recommended for another $1.3 million of capital investment.
In permanent supportive housing specifically, I think going to a comment earlier about the number of people experiencing homelessness with disabilities.
I have one more question.
One more, John?
Yeah. So in the handout, we talked about the increases in homelessness in Athens are outpacing the rest of the state. So, but correct me if I'm wrong, none of this is showing anything to prevent people from coming in. Back to what Commissioner Thornton was saying, we need to invest in that if we're outpacing the rest of the state in our growth of homelessness.
So, I'm not sure how to answer that question about people coming into Athens, because based on the data that we have available, which is from the point in time count, it was a little more than 10% of people who came into the county. And we did interview a few people for this who came into the county, and they did not want to come into the county. It was just that there was no shelter available in their county. So in that situation, what would have stopped them from coming to Athens is if there was a shelter available in a rural county. And so that did not seem like a positive recommendation for use of this funds. Other counties near you definitely have their own lack of services, lack of housing, and those are the root reasons why people are coming to Athens. Yes, there might be information out there on the internet. I know there are already efforts underway to scrub as much of that as possible. So what seemed, the best strategic use of these funds was to, think about the totality of what's going on. So you have the affordable housing plan, and you have a pot of ARPA dollars for that. You had the home ARP dollars, as was just mentioned, that was primarily allocated towards permanent supportive housing. And then this pot of dollars, which is, it's, even though there's a lot of service-based strategies, dollar-wise, it's pretty much split between another capital investment in shelter, and then the other half of it going to these service improvements, which will allow you to, if fully implemented, to implement things like diversion and flexible funding that might help, reunify families from people outside of the county, and or fix issues of people who had come to Athens but now are willing to leave. And there's certainly communities that do pay for plane tickets and bus tickets out of these types of funds, for people to reunify with families or go to another safe housing situation that is away from that community. But also, again, to be able to strengthen your service system in general, to engage in the kind of collaboration that's necessary to really get to some of those root causes of why are people coming to Athens.
I've got everybody, so Tiffany?
Great work, you guys. I just have a quick question. For the residents that we know who are unhoused, who receive services here in Athens-Clarke County, is there any way that we could possibly get funding from the counties that they're coming from to help support them getting services here in Athens-Clarke County, or is that unethical? I didn't think so. Pay what you
That
like.
is possible. It would be up to, so it's theoretically possible. I don't know how much funding some of these counties have. If they have no shelter, no transitional housing, they might have no money allocated to them from the balance of state because they don't have any eligible projects. So it's entirely possible that there just is no dollars in some of these neighboring counties to be able to serve people. For counties that do, yes, like I mentioned, there's an example, Atlanta and Fulton counties share the cost of some projects because they're different continuums of care. I believe there's another county in Atlanta that does some cost sharing as well. So, there are examples of these models of what you're talking about. It really takes a good structure in your continuum because this would sit with the continuum of care for these collaborative programs.
And I'll interject just very briefly. The entire state is in a housing crunch, particularly the northern third of the state. And so right now there's a study group underway to expand housing generally around the state. It's been a big emphasis of the General Assembly the last couple of cycles. But I think kind of to the report's point, the only adjacent county that provides any supportive housing at all is Barrow with just a couple of dozen beds. And in fact, Gwinnett County, nearing 1 million population, has only introduced shelter beds within the last 2 years. So we're in a somewhat challenged region. So, but Tiffany, do you have some other question? Dexter.
Thank you, Mayor. This question is for the staff first. What was the on the RFP? What did we ask Cloudburst to look into? Just give me a summary, and then I'll let you know where I'm going.
Generally the RFP asked them to come up with an allocation for the remaining ARPA dollars, and generally look for different proposed strategies that would help us prevent and reduce homelessness in Athens. Most of them, they're all based on key learnings and best practices from across the country from similar communities. So that was the gist of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, when I look at strategic plans, and I try to look at what impact does this make on our community, and what impact when we look at a strategic plan? And to Commissioner Thornton's points, I'm a little disappointed in the plan, and I realized that all our, the funding was laid out for each area that we need to fund. I didn't see anything in there from the business community to help participate in some of this funding code. At the rate that we're going, this is not sustainable, and we're not going to be able to keep up with the funding source. So somewhere along the line, if we're going to implement this or vote on this, whatever way we decide to do, is we got to figure out how we're going to involve our business communities, not only faith-based, but also our business communities. So got some concerns about that. And the other thing that was, like I said, on the impact on the community, and we talk about people coming into our community, and they keep coming. As you know, the legislators did pass some legislation about different communities bringing folks into our community, and that's supposed to be illegal now. How do we police that? Of course, we're never gonna do away with the homeless situation, but how do we reduce it? And I don't want Athens to be the place where everybody feel like they can come and get resources and not get support from other communities or not, that's from other communities. So I think there's some more work to do that we need to take a look at for how we're gonna move forward with that. But I'm concerned, moving forward, for how we're gonna address some of this.
Manager Williams?
Well, I'd like to clarify what a strategic planning process is and isn't. And part of it's the plan at the end. And I would argue that this is a pretty comprehensive set of strategies with recommendations across, understanding what our unique situation is here for a universal problem in homelessness. And it was meant to bring to you as the elected body a number of ideas that you could then act on, not just for ARPA funding, but just in general. We've had a homeless in probably since Athens was founded, and it's gotten more intense as of late, as you all have noted. The other part of a strategic planning exercise is everybody's collective experience. And so it's opening the table, having folks come talk about it. If you all remember, there were multiple and separate conversations going on for several years. Group over here planning something, group over here planning something. And it was meant to bring everybody together and put everything on the table, because we can't fund everything. And so there's got to be some priorities. So now you have in front of you a plan that, it's not the Bible on homelessness. It doesn't have silver bullets in it, but it is a collection of thoughts that is fueled and informed by people that live here, with folks that have an expertise and have seen things in other towns. And so it brought it together. It is not the end of the story. It is just a more informed set of information for y'all to reflect on. If there's something here that's missing, if you have other ideas on how, other strategies on how to deal with homelessness, we'd love to hear those. We can include those in there. And then going forward, I think it's going to be, it's the prerogative of the commission certainly to assign funds to whichever priority you think is most important. I think that the COC is an important partner. So for those reasons, I'm sorry that y'all are disappointed in the effort, but this is what we pretty much expected, and I think we had pretty good engagement. Sounds like we need to make sure that other folks are aware of this and can share their thoughts. But that's what the strategic plan was meant to do. There's a lot more work to be done. So that's one point I wanted to make, Mayor. The second is, I know that this law passed. In practicality, people are free to move around in this country and move in between counties. So to your point, Commissioner Fisher, I don't understand exactly how, and we can certainly talk with the attorney and view the state law and talk to the police about what that looks like. And I know that the state put that into place, and I need to read it more and understand it. I think we'd be very careful about arresting a stranger in town. But somebody has looked at this and said it's fine, and so I pledge to you, I will talk to the attorney and the chief of police and see if there's anything can be done, and I'll advise y'all accordingly.
Yeah, and I get it, but and we know it's no secret, people are being driven here and dropped off. Some of those folks are law enforcement from other counties, so we know that's going on. One other point I want to make, we're looking at our street counts. You got about a little bit over 300, and I don't think we can ever determine really what our homeless population is. To me, I think that's way too low.
Sure.
I truly believe that. I think it's way too low.
And Commissioner, I would direct you and members of the public to the full report that lists a much larger number in the HMIS, Homeless Management Information System. So again, this is the point in time count, so this is just that one weekend, but you'll see a number in the low thousands.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So,
And I think you hit on an important point, and I think that our consultant representatives hit on an important point too. We all tend to look at our respective jurisdictions at the county lines, but problems don't know county lines. They spill across those. And I think it was a pretty accurate assessment that the surrounding counties don't have the support infrastructure that we have, and that you can say that's not fair. We're an urban regional center, and I think you'll find in most urban regional centers the same setup. The priorities of the residents in other communities may not be the same as the priorities of the elected officials here. Certainly they may not have as many resources as we have, and those elected officials choose to spend them in certain ways. But I would say that I think there's a lot of merit to approaching this on a regional basis. I don't think it's reasonable to assume that they're going to replicate this type of infrastructure in those counties. I do think it would be fair that they would contribute perhaps to, and there could be a conversation on that. I know the mayor is very involved with the regional center, regional commission here. And I think it's something you broached before, Mayor. I think we should continue to do that. I think rather than locking up somebody who's seeking help, maybe having these counties contribute and help pay a fair share. Now, what's fair, what their share is, that's a political discussion. But I think a lot of our issues that we deal with, housing being one as well. We have very different postures south and east of us on housing that we don't, but there is a regional need. There's a regional workforce here. And so I think there's a lot of promise in regional cooperation.
And it's something of noting from that, something of a statewide parallel. So Macon is similarly situated as a regional hub. They're, of course, the hospital center and the educational center for Middle Georgia. They have just worked with Warner Robins, 25 miles to their south, and Warner Robins is now setting up a homeless shelter, kind of recognizing that Macon was getting so much spillover from Houston County. So I think there is some illustration in the state of that cross-boundary collaboration. So I'm glad to see that. I'd definitely love to see that around here. Go ahead, Dexter.
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. Okay.
I've got Melissa and then Jesse.
Yeah. So throughout this presentation and throughout the study, we talk about a need for staffing. But if the people aren't out there who are willing to do this work, it's kind of pointless. And I really think we need to incorporate this strategy into our workforce development and assure that we are training people to do this work, because it is work and it should be paid well as work. And maybe some of the folks who are transitioning out of homelessness can also do this work. So I think we need to embrace that strategy. And I'm glad Commissioner Byers brought up the faith-based approach, and I know that there are several churches that do work with Family Promise, who do work with homelessness. But it's a small percentage of the number of churches and faith-based organizations in town. So I hope that we will reach out very directly to every single faith-based organization in town, and not only in Athens, but beyond Athens. If these other county governments are not taking up this work, maybe the faith-based organizations in those counties will, and there is funding there, and I know that other counties are starting to see this issue too. My husband works in Barrow County, and he sees it there too. So we talk about how people get here and why they get here and remain homeless. We do have hospitals. I live right next to Piedmont, And I'd frequently take the bus from the bus stop near there, and I frequently chat up people who are obviously homeless and have heard anecdotes. And some of these folks get here because they come to our hospital and they're released and they have nowhere to go. And we do have services, and we should be proud of the fact that we have services. We're a compassionate community, and we always have been. But, you know, we shouldn't be too proud to ask for help. And we need to approach our state legislators, make sure that they are giving us the help that we need when it comes to housing, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to homelessness, and when it comes to engaging other communities to assist in that help and to establish their own services. Because, you know, a person should not have to leave the community that they know because they are homeless and end up in a place with a bunch of strangers just because they know they can get a meal every day and possibly, you know, a bed to lay in once in a while. So, you know, I think that we really need to broaden our scope in taking this approach. And I think it would be helpful. One thing I noticed in the plan, we have a list of the organizations that were engaged. I think it would be helpful to the public if there was an additional appendix that had maybe a one-page description of each of those organizations, because in talking to people in the general public, they have no idea that there is this much service out there or what any of these organizations do. So I think a more detailed description of each of the organizations in this continuum of care would help the public process this better and maybe be able to provide more detailed feedback on their own. And you know, I think there will always be situations where people will live outdoors. Whether or not there's, you know, actual roofs available for people to habitate under, you know, I think there is just a certain personality that prefers to live outdoors, and it has been throughout history. It was the hermit in the woods, you know, or the gypsy in a wagon. There will be people who will always prefer that kind of habitation, and I think we need to accommodate them too and assure that that outdoor living is sanitary and safe, and you know, these people are not a danger to the rest of the community. So I think we need to accept you know, diverse personalities among this population.
Commissioner Houle.
Thank you, Mayor. So first, I'm just going to ask for some grace from my colleagues here, because this is a topic that I can't discuss alongside prison without getting pretty worked up. I think we've all done a lot of working with people who are unhoused, people in precarious housing situations, organizations, and people working for those organizations who work with those folks. Based on my conversations in our retreats and stuff, I think I'm the only person on this body who's been unhoused. One of two. Cool. All right. So, you know, it's just, I just can't talk about it without getting worked up. So I might be a bit more meandering than I try to be. I'm going to try to really lean on my notes here. First thing I want to talk about is this idea of people coming in that keeps coming up. I mean, you know, it's very tough to define what constitutes someone coming here in the first place. I mean, by virtue of being unhoused, the moment you're in Athens, you're living here because you don't have a home. But by any definition people try to use, you know, how recently did you get here, where did you live before you were unhoused, et cetera, the data bears out that it is very much a fraction. I think they said around 10% of the people here who are recently here. So that gets a super disproportionate amount of the focus, I believe. Probably in part because it's extra visible. People who arrive here don't know anyone, often don't know their way around, so they're more likely to not know where to go, how to get help, who to get help from, and therefore they are more visible. So they might be, you know, representative of the most visible part of the problem, but they are not representative of the majority of the problem. The fact is we have a large and growing population of unhoused people in this community, and the vast majority of those people, around 90% of them, are, by whatever definition you want to use, from here. So we should probably focus on the 90%, not the 10, I would think. I'd also like to note that it's not my experience as a homeless person in my past that qualifies me to say this, nor is it my anecdotes of talking to other people around the community. I think it's data. I think facts matter. We're hearing that from these consultants. We hear it from our staff. If people want a book, there's a book I really love called Homelessness is a Housing Problem, How Structural Factors Explain U.S. Patterns by Greg Colburn and Clayton Page Aldern. It was published last year. It has very up-to-date data. It also provides really good examples of how to interpret that data. As someone who's not only passionate about this, but considers myself a bit of a nerd about it, I would say that I learned quite a bit from this book, even though it also says a lot of things that to me felt like they weren't new. For example, the way PIT counts, point-in-time counts, work is that you're counting people on a given day every year. And what this leads to is an overrepresentation of the chronically unhoused. So actually, like, I've been looking at data and thinking, man, we really need to focus on the chronically unhoused, actually misunderstanding the data to think that that was an even greater population than it is. Now, I still think it's a priority because of how chronic that problem is for so many people. But if you're counting, let's say, 10 people who are unhoused this year, and one's chronically unhoused and the other 9 just got kicked out by Prosperity Capital Partners, right? Well, if you house the 9 that just got kicked out by Prosperity Capital Partners, and then the next year you do another count and there's 10 people again, and you have the same one person still unhoused because they've been that way for 6 years, but now you have 9 other people who live in a property managed by strategic management partners who get kicked out, then those folks, you know, they might get rehoused again too, but you count the same one person. So that one person is actually only 1/19th, not 1/10, right? Anyway, that's just like a note, one of many. Maybe this book is worth reading. Facts matter. Second thing is, there's these assertions about this plan and the other plan that we heard about last month, the affordable housing plan, that there's nothing new here. And I would like to argue that there are some new things here. First of all, the genesis of these reports is new. The magnitude of the input and the diversity of sources that have been drawn upon for both of these sources and then aggregated into a singular report that we can point to that is focused on this issue in particular is, as far as I understand it, the first time we've ever done anything like it. But if we have done anything like it, it's been a long time. Maybe you'd point to the Athens Wellbeing Project. Great project, doesn't go as deeply into these issues, hasn't pulled from as many sources, doesn't have anywhere near the detailed information these ones do. The second is the data and the information in these reports is new by virtue of being a new report that came out after COVID and after ARPA and after CARES Act funding, by virtue of being a report that came out in the midst of the escalating housing crisis we're always talking about. This report, even if it was entirely redundant from one we did 2 years ago, would be relevant because it has up-to-date, new, specific to our local community information. And thirdly, but I think extremely importantly, what would be especially new would be for us to act on these recommendations. So let's pretend for a second that we knew every single thing that this report would say, that somehow we all already knew it and agreed upon it, and everybody who was surveyed and participated also already knew and agreed upon it. And let's say that we didn't even need it as an objective thing to point to cite, to take action. What would be new for this body would be to act on those recommendations. So if we do agree that this is all so old and obvious that we don't even need the report, then now we have the report, we can accept it, and then we can put the money that we've never put towards these things before towards solutions. Which brings me to my third thing. I know I'm just, this is not upset with anybody in the room. This is just an intense topic for me. I do have a concern about the way these two reports talk to each other. I very much like this report. I very much like the affordable housing report. We've talked a lot about the two of them talking to each other, integrating the affordable housing plan with the homelessness plan, or the plan to strategic plan to reduce and prevent homelessness. Permanent supportive housing. So we have a local housing fund, which should not be conflated with the other fund noted, I think, in like key strategy 8 or 9 here. They're not the support fund, they're different funds, right? We need to, hopefully we'll accept this obvious report and we'll fund the local housing fund. And then when we do, maybe we'll set up a strike fund and we'll acquire some properties and we'll do cool things with them. I would love that. That'd be amazing. That would be actually, turns out, totally new. If we did that, which I think would be great, I really hope that we won't just focus our LIHTC funding, our low income housing tax credit funding that the affordable housing strategy talks about. Can we please not just use that to subsidize 60% or 80% AMI? Can we also use it for deep subsidies, especially permanent supportive housing? I'm glad to hear people today mention permanent supportive housing, but if I look at the homelessness strategic plan as it is currently presented to us, it is but a footnote in Goal 4. It is not explicitly articulated in any of the 10 key strategies. And, I mean, we're talking about a lot of things at once here. We have all these things that we're talking about the planning department and our future land use map and revisiting our zoning codes, and all that hopefully is going to help the free market solve part of our housing crisis by just getting a lot more housing built, supply and demand, right? Supply and demand is going to help people in stable incomes retain their housing even if they're below average, because we'll just have so much of it that it'll naturally cost less. But what it will never help is people who are deeply low income. What it will never help is people who require that supportive element to stay stable in their housing at all. So even though it's a lower number of people to help, it might be, say, 25% of what we could help if we just threw it all towards 60% or 80% AMI. Much more expensive per person or per unit. I think the impact in terms of making a transformative difference in the lives of people who otherwise will not get help from anyone is huge. And so I do hope somehow that we will find a way to better emphasize permanent supportive housing, ideally probably using LIHTC funding, which I understand is an eligible source, to fund these things. And then otherwise, I really hope we can stop talking smack about the consultant that's easy to beat up on because they're on a virtual screen, and thank them for meeting the charge, I think, quite well, and aligning with our staff and dozens, if not hundreds, of supportive providers in the community to bring us a plan. And it's not perfect, and maybe it's got gaps, and let's work with those gaps to make maybe the next one better. It also maps out a plan for evaluating and evolving itself. But please, let's adapt this plan, let's act on its recommendations, and have a productive discussion about what to prioritize. In that, I ask that we prioritize this one thing. Thank you.
Mayor, that's it.
Please, Lip.
First of all, we're not beating up on anybody. We spent $200,000 to do this, so it's their job to come back with with a strategic plan. We may or may not agree on it, but nobody's getting beat up on. They're professional, and they get that. And it's our job to make sure that whatever money that we spent is going to benefit this community. So you just say that we're beating up on the consultants. I'm insulted by that. So I don't think we beat up on them. I just think the fact of the matter is, we look at things differently, with different lenses, and that's okay. But again, we spent the money. There's a plan. Some of us agree with it, some of us don't. So, that's unacceptable, Jesse. So we're not beating up on anybody.
Well, my point there is if we're going to disregard this whole plan while simultaneously saying it says nothing new, then I don't know how we rectify the fact that the vast majority of people who are unhoused in this community are from this community. And most of the discussion keeps focusing on how we police those, which I'm assuming means police the individuals who are already in the most desperate situation people can imagine. Unless we're expecting to somehow have state power to police neighboring counties or something, maybe we can get our state government to get those counties to do better, or to magically get them to have more funding, or raise their own taxes to fund their own shelters. But I don't know what we're going to keep talking about, policing the 10% of people that come here from other communities, instead of talking about the recommendations that are being brought forth with a whole lot of data to back it up. I can't understand how to make sense of that.
We do have a couple other presentations, so I'm going to draw together some thoughts so we can move forward. Appreciate everybody's engagement, and to the Cloudburst folks, appreciate the work that you've done. I've often found it valuable to have an outside set of eyes on your community, because we live and breathe the air here in Clarke County, and we walk these streets every day. And sometimes it's nice to have those new eyes to identify the gaps that we have in provisions that are here now. And as I consider the gaps that were in this plan, really they fall in kind of a couple of areas. There are certainly coordination gaps, and I think everybody widely recognizes that we want to eliminate siloization, and we want all of the entities that are doing great work doing that work in a concerted way so that they're not doing it separately. And some of those gaps are in service delivery, just having the boots on the ground and the direct hand-holding, of course, that a lot of members of the community are going to need, whether that's around mental health services, whether that's around helping people become aware of some of these existing resources or forthcoming resources. And of course, the biggest gap is just in having a place to call home. And so I very much hope that we can move forward to developing some permanent assets. And some of those may look different. Some of those may be small tiny homes, or some of the off-the-shelf kind of opportunities that a lot of vendors have available now that would be a more permanent version of something that somebody could move into immediately. And some of them hopefully will be those kind of settings that any of us would want to live in on a permanent basis. And so, of course, we have a lot of work underway. That comprehensive plan that we're in the midst of updating right now, parallel with a lot of our partners around the state, is going to be a critical piece, as we know, in just producing more housing. I think expenditure of these funds is going to be critical. I do hope that we can very rapidly identify some property, and we'll have a conversation in the very near future about that, so that we can create some place for our unsheltered neighbors. And I think we're going to need some long-term funding. I don't think there's any doubt about that. As I think many of you have identified, we've got this short-term window, and we're glad to have it rather than nothing, but we're going to have to identify some permanent funding streams. One opportunity I would point to is that some other municipalities and unified governments have taken advantage of. And so, for example, for a long time, Columbus Muskogee has developed an other local option sales tax program, and I would identify that as something we should pursue in conjunction with our state partners so that we have a permanent revenue stream. Because I think, to one of Jesse's points, there's always going to be, even in a supply-heavy environment or an environment where we're drawing down as many federal LIHTC dollars as possible, a gap for those people who are living on the margins. And for the 220 years that this has been a place called Athens, there have been people living on the margins. And so we're going to need some kind of consistent funding stream for people in that 0% of AMI or 30% of AMI strata. So I want to place that on the table as something that, along with expenditure of these funds and our comprehensive plan work, that we need to dive into. So I'm looking forward to those conversations. I want to thank everybody for their engagement around this. I know it's a dense and complex area, and to our housing and community development staff and to our partners at Cloudburst, thank you very much. Hope you have a great evening, and we are going to have to move on in the evening now.
Kelly, if I might, just one clarification, I'm sorry, just to make sure the public may not be confused. So when Lydia was talking, I believe she was talking about our emergency shelter plan, which is at its beginning stages. And so there will be opportunity to engage. So if you'll remember the warming shelter, and at the time, we did an after action and we said, okay, we can't let that happen all last minute. That's not great. And as it turned out, we were having a pre-disaster mitigation plan. We have to do that every so many years. So we spoke into that with that group of emergency responders, but just having a paragraph in that plan is not really a plan. And so I want to thank Assistant Manager Edwards and Jones and our HCD staff and our fire chief Scarborough, because they've been at the fire chief, emergency management lives in the fire department that helps to coordinate all the public safety agencies. And so we've got a draft of the plan. We're talking to others. We're inviting them to the table. So there is time. And this one is towards the end for y'all to accept, but that emergency shelter plan, we will certainly reach out to clergy.
And I see you flinging, you're doing that to me.
Well, because you were saying, I want to make sure the churches are involved, and they will absolutely be involved because we're hopeful that there'll be a resource for that. So that outreach will happen.
Okay.
So I just want to, I know there was, and for somebody outside watching, they may not have distinguished between the two plans, so I wanted to just.
And, I guess, Manager Williams, thank you for that explanation. I am glad that Commissioner Hull is speaking with such passion, because this is a conversation that we need to probably have over a Coca-Cola or a beer or something, you know what I mean? But because the same passion he's speaking about is the same passion I always speak about race and people. So I'm there. I didn't know you were homeless, but you knew I was black. So when I speak about these issues, it's the same passion. But to say we were policing or doing, that is the furthest from where we need to be. And I don't want HCD, our consultants, to think that we don't appreciate it. We speak from different places, but I do not want to leave here thinking that, we got something against HCD or we don't like the plan. And no, that is not the case. So let's get that clear. So maybe we'll talk later, Commissioner Hull, but that's not the way I want to leave this meeting.
I appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next topic, and that is SPLOST 2020 program. So staff is going to get set up to talk to us about our mental health facility that we've spent a couple of other meetings this year talking about, and we're going to dive in a little bit deeper with some schematics so we can look at physically what that may look like when it comes out of the ground.
And Mayor, would you please let people know I wasn't being disrespectful? I have something else going on, and I just needed to be here for this. So I'm not being disrespectful for my leave of absence.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you.
No. Chord switching.
I don't know, like, I didn't get it.
I am showing 75% charge, so I'm hoping that for our 10 minutes of questions that we're good. We will do our best. Yeah, I'm going in. It's too hot. You can't have anything outside.
I mean, all my other stuff showing up, my jeans,
I got cucumbers.
my cucumbers in.
Red is
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you'll have that up there. I never can reference notes very well.
Thank you. I got put in the water.
No, it doesn't matter. And I'll just step out this way.
Okay, that'll work.
When we start, if y'all just stand, if y'all can stand the whole time, it'll be a little easier. That's up to you. I mean,
He has it prepared.
well, if you can't done it,
That's it. Yeah.
if you want to use this for full reverse.
Yes, for permanent, yeah. New ordinance. All right, everybody, we've got the laptop switched out, and we are here with Keith Sanders, and he's going to introduce the rest of the team.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Mayor. As we're here to give you the proposed schematic design for the SPLOST 2020 Project 28 Mental Health Recovery Facility. We also have, in addition to myself, Mike Cater is a project administrator with the SPLOST office. Y'all probably have not interacted with him yet, so this is his first presentation to you. Also, we have Evan Mills, Director of Housing and Development with Advantage Behavior. Mike Wharton's going to do a part of the presentation, and we also have members of the design team here with us. So we've sent this out ahead. We have this information. We'll run through this, the history and project statement. We'll just touch on briefly. It's mostly for your reference. I'll skip through this history. I know you've had a chance to look at it already. Wanted to touch on, as we get to the end here, a couple of key items is that you did approve $4 million of ARPA dollars for this project back in June. Also, it'll come up later in the process, in the presentation, but you also in June approved a portion of the community energy fund policy and where those dollars should be put. We're going to potentially tap into some of those or ask for some of that as part of this. And also Advantage Behavior has applied for $4.7 million in state home ARP funds for additional construction. And so they won't be notified about their status on that until November, but it's coming, so we hope. Our project statement, this is what we go by. This is what was approved on the referendum. This is everything we do on a project should fit within this, and what we're going to show you tonight just continues that process. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike and the design team to talk about the schematic design.
All right, Keith, thank you. As you can see, and to kind of remind you a little bit, our site is located to the northeast of the existing Advantage Behavioral Health System off of Mitchell Bridge and Westchester Road. As you can see, we are proposing for this project to subdivide off the project or the property necessary so that all of our new construction sits on a separate piece of land from the existing facility. This is due to make sure that it is not mortgaged with there is an existing one for the renovations that were done on the existing building. To access it, we will use the existing infrastructure road, expanded and improved for emergency vehicle access back to the new facility. There will also be sidewalk connectivity from Westchester to the front door of our new facility, and we are proposing the potential location for the public art component of this project as a art improvement of the existing bus stop that sits off of Westchester Road. Zooming in a little bit, you can see the phase 1 is being shown of our project is being shown in the orange, with phase 2 being shown in the aqua. We are dividing them into 2 phases simply because the funding does not exist to build it all out at once. In the first phase, let me make sure I have my numbers right, we're proposing 10 two-bedroom apartments and 30 parking spots to service the residents and the staff for the facility. This will get built out. The aqua represents 16 two-bedroom apartments and an additional 30 spaces, bringing our totals to 26 apartments with the goal of providing 60 beds for residents and 60 parking spots for residents and staff. You'll forgive us for putting it a little bit out of order, but we put this rendering up front to hopefully ease some confusion. It is a 2-story facility, but they are both accessible by the ground. Nothing is a basement level. The top image you will see is what we are considering the main floor. It will have the main entrance. The lower image shows what we are calling the back of the building, but it also shows the lower floor and how that is ground accessible. So when we talk about the main floor, this is what we are proposing for the schematic floor plan. It has the main entry, 6 two-bedroom apartments, as well as staff offices, emergency food storage for the facility, housekeeping, public restrooms, a computer room for the residents, laundry, meeting rooms, and important, I think, for both the residents and the staff, they will each have a covered porch for some outdoor recreation recovery time. The main level comes to 11,272 square feet. This is the proposed schematic for the lower level, both of these being for phase 1. It will have 2 4-bedroom apartments in it, a community room with a demonstration kitchen in it, a fitness facility, again, some housekeeping and general storage space. It will also contain the mechanical, electrical, and riser room for the facility. The lower level is 8,121 square feet, bringing our grand total for the phase 1 of the project to 19,393 square feet. In this rendering, this shows the complete build-out, including phase 1 and phase 2. As you can see, phase 2 are the wings, and they would provide a total of 16 apartments. Depending on funding, they can both be built together or one at a time as funding allows. They will also encompass a landscaped and hardscaped courtyard to be used by the staff and residents. Here's what the proposed floor plan, and the proposed floor plan is very similar for both the main level and the lower level. The addition for phase 2 adds 19,692 square feet, as well as the bedrooms and common spaces that we've discussed previously. The beds are a proposed number. Each apartment has 2 bedrooms. Each bedroom can house 1 or 2 beds or 1 or 2 residents. They are all set up exactly the same. And I'm going to step aside, let Mike talk to you some about our proposed solar for this project.
So we would like to propose to bring an additional benefit and aspect and element to this project, a solar plus battery approach. What you see is a concept for an array. The reason we're proposing the arrays is they're more energy, they will gather more electrical energy as they track the sun, and in this case, it'll fit better with the way the site is oriented as opposed to rooftop solar. This is a concept plan, so there will need to be some adjustments that we need to look at as we get further into the design and go forward. So the exact location will change. What I will say is we'll make every effort as we move forward to not cut down native trees. If you're an invasive, you're fair game. But for native trees, that is going to be a priority for us to try to adjust around.
Plenty of kudzu in the proximity.
Oh, we will take down kudzu. The solar array is 4.9. There are 9 solar arrays proposed, with 6 dedicated to solar energy. Right now we project, and probably 3 will be dedicated to battery storage on the site. Each one of those solar arrays can produce 40,000 kilowatt hours, up to that amount per array per year. To give you that in perspective, a household uses about 10 to 11,000 kilowatt hours per year. So that kind of puts that in perspective. The batteries will have a dual purpose. They will be used at night to help extend that solar energy into the nighttime. And they'll also have an automatic, we're designing for an automatic switch in case of storms or bad weather where the grid goes down. It will reserve that battery power for critical systems during that time, kind of creating a little bit of resilience hub there for us as well. The total amount we project to be 70 to 90% of the need for electrical energy, and that's the best we can do right now and that is for the entire build out. That is all 3 phases. So with this amount of money that we're requesting, all 3 phases would be covered. That's up to about $1.2 million in total. And the mental health facility is bringing a critical need to the community. It is also, the storage plus battery is exactly what the Community Energy Fund was designed to address, is to meet those community needs. In this project meets 5, you'll see this in your agenda report where we detailed it, it meets 5 of the 6 Community Energy Fund goals. So it's really hitting on those pretty well. And for these and other reasons, we're recommending that we allocate up to 1.2 from the Community Energy Fund. Currently, that amount is just under 1.3. So the money is there to do this. And in 18 to 24 months from the time you approve this, you'll be standing under those solar arrays, drinking up that solar energy. So we're pretty happy with that addition.
All right, moving on to our budget for this. As I said earlier, y'all approved in June the additional ARPA funds, and we got the SPLOST dollars, and we, as Mike said, in part of the agenda report, would be asking to budget allocate $1.2 million from the community energy funds for these solar upgrades for our almost $10.5 million proposed project revenue. Of that, we would need about $6.6 million, we estimate, for available construction for phase 1. That is just for phase 1. The full build of phase 1 and 2 would be about $12.3 million. It's the current estimate, or an additional $5.7. And the reason that's a little less than phase 1, even though the square footage is basically the difference, is predominantly phase 1 covers the site work. Most of that site effort is done under phase 1, and there'd be very little additional site work that would have to go into phase 2. If somehow the 5.7 was available, probably, maybe, we always estimate versus doing something at 2 different times, we'd probably save up to maybe 10% doing the 2 constructions at once. So the estimate the one alternate pricing we're going to ask for right now as part of that is to change this to a crawl space versus slab on grade. Main reason being maintenance and clean outs of sanitary line, as things get flushed and lines get clogged, and just it's a whole lot easier to deal with that in a crawl space, and any adjustments you need to make in the future for those ground floors for utilities would be easier. So You can see the assumptions we've made for the estimate. It does include about $185,000 for sustainable upgrades to hit Earthcraft certification. Excuse me. That is substantially, that's the money, that's the premium to go above the current energy code to get to the certification level. If you were around for the fire station and co-op, you might recall that number was probably 3 times that amount to go from energy code to LEED certification for that project. A couple of reasons. The big difference there was some of the energy codes have been improved, and so the delta to get between the two is less than it used to be. And also Earthcraft certification process is, I think, far easier to get through. You still get a good quality project. You still get the energy efficiency and upgrades. It's just some of those key components are less expensive with Earthcraft, which is is one of the changes you made recently to your sustainability policy that allows us to do that. So with that, our schedule going forward, if we're presenting the schematic for your consideration in October, we'd move through construction documents in the spring. Hopefully, Advantage Behavior gets notified in November of some additional funds. We hope to go out to bid in the early summer and start construction late summer, and then be complete by summer of '25. And with that, we'll turn it over for questions.
Thanks, Keith. Appreciate it. Blaine, you had a couple minutes to follow up?
Well, just real quick, so some commissioners noted that the budget slide is not in the current packet.
Yes, and that is completely my fault. I accidentally left it out of the
It's
PDF.
fine.
I had it edited and I
No
hit
problem,
the wrong
but
button.
can you send it to me tonight? I'll send it
Yes.
out, and can you coordinate with Gene to have it placed on the website so folks have the
Yes.
most accurate information?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Allison?
Yeah, thank you for this comprehensive thing, but I'm going to focus on the solar panels real quick, because I can just see down the road, the maintenance of this property would be a major budget ask potentially, or a hardship for those that are responsible for running it, which would be Advantage, right?
That's correct.
Our part is initial, and then after that. So I really appreciate that being part of the concept being included, and because of the math, that's impressive that we can help with the electrical cost. Thanks.
Again, thank you all for doing this and putting this together. My question is, on your building, are you looking at, I know you're gonna have men and women, so how would you, how many house for women, how many house for men? Have y'all thought about that, or what that might look like?
I'm going to let Advantage Behavior decide. I mean, the rooms all the apartments are the same.
Oh, yeah.
So how they break them up would be.
We're going to focus on individuals, single men and single women. No families with children in this project. But right now, within our current programs that are similar to this, that we're looking at expanding, it's about a 65-35% male-female ratio. We're probably going to look at a 60-40 or even 50-50. It really is going to depend on need and availability. These are going to be in roommate situations, so obviously we're not going to have a male and a female in the same unit. So, we've got rating tools and assessment tools based on priority of need, and as units come available, we will prioritize that need, be that a female or a male. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, yes.
Got a handful of folks. Mike?
Sure. Just a question on the funding. It looked like we were a little bit short, so I'm assuming that's hoping that the grant dollars will come in from the state.
Well, we think we have enough for phase one.
Right.
So the plan is to move forward with design and construction for phase one, but
Okay.
not phase two.
And the phase two, would the state dollars kick in with that? Is that?
That's what the grant application is hoping, is if they get the full 4.7, that we would have enough to do full phase two.
And it looks like it's cheaper if we can get that and build it all at the same time. Is that right?
In theory, what we show as phase two being 2 wings, you
Right.
could build as phase 2 and 3. You could build one wing but not the other. And the current estimate is, if we get the 4.7, we might be still a little short to do both wings, but we would price it and see, and then we would use the dollars.
Okay, that's good. The schematic looks great. I think you've put a lot of work into this, and certainly the folks from Advantage I know are get up and think every day about what they can do to help this community. So it's definitely appreciated. And I have an idea about where you can find some more solar arrays if you need them. So thank you.
Melissa.
Yeah, speaking of the solar arrays, do you have any numbers on what the potential annual energy cost savings would be for these with these arrays?
Without really having the electrical done and looking at the load levels, it's hard to say. The solar provider, and based on the estimates we're getting, is between 70 and 90%. That's about all we can do at this phase, at this stage.
But I imagine like these arrays are going to pay for themselves within a handful of years.
Yes, we fully expect it. And so we expect that to offset a significant amount of their current operating cost for them as a result.
Okay. So that's more money to be put into helping folks.
Right. The return on investment for the ones at the library was 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that did include some matching funds from the state that offset a little bit of that. But for the full arrays that were approved last week, that was just slightly over 15 years.
Thank you.
Patrick?
Yeah, just a quick question on the emergency fire truck. Is it possible to extend the lower south end road across the existing creek to Mitchell Bridge, or the fire services or emergency medical services no issue?
Yeah, and that was when the plan was first submitted by Advantage Behavior to the SPLOST Oversight or Advisory Committee. That was part of what they had submitted, was to have an access road off of Mitchell Bridge. But that probably adds about another $4 million to the project. So yes, it's possible, but financially it's not.
Thank you.
Carol?
Yeah, on the solar arrays, the community energy funds, I just wanted you to review with us where that funding is coming from, but also wanted to ask you to, and when you're doing that, to clarify how those funds, or whether those funds can be used differently than the SPLOST renewable energy funds, because this is not, we don't own this building. We're not going to own this building, right? So could we be doing this with SPLOST funds, and those community energy funds can be used in clarify that for me.
Great. So the source of the funds is from a certain percentage over franchise fees that you get every year. This is what was embedded in the plan that you passed and approved. So it grows each year, and as energy costs go up, more money comes in above that amount. That's that amount at around $7-8 million. I don't have the exact numbers with me, but that's how the fund is growing. The first allocation was about $337,000, and that happened when you approved it in June. The plan, because that was FY22. This is FY23 funding, and that's the difference between 337 and 1.3 million was that what came in this year with now the sad part is that means energy costs have risen too.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the heartache of this, of what goes with that. So in answer to your question, yes, we could use SPLOST money here, and
We could or could not?
we could.
Okay.
And we could use community energy fund, say for Athens Housing Authority project or something down there. However, the reverse is also true. We have a lot of buildings inside Athens-Clarke County, which is, we're trying to project to get to 100% by 2035 for Athens-Clarke County government and our municipal buildings. We have some buildings that are in real need. The community energy fund, while it could be used on those buildings also, in the spirit of how that passage is focused on the community, I would never recommend that and feel like that would not be what you would want to do, because that fund is to help the community. And this is a huge need within the community. It's also one that's ready to go and ready to come out of the chute. So in answer to your question, yes, we could, and then we could use that somewhere else in the community, but that also comes, it's like a little bit like robbing Peter to pay Paul. You then can't really do your other ACC buildings.
And on that you said the agenda report is going to have that criteria that we've established for the Community Energy Fund?
Yes.
Yeah. And so in a way, actually, we're helping out the environment, but we're also helping out Advantage Behavioral Health, because once these good things go into play, that's another cost that they will not have. So they have more for services and other things
Exactly.
instead of paying utilities. Great.
Jesse.
Thanks. Piggybacking on the last thing Commissioner Myers said, I mean, helping out Advantage is helping us very much so. I mean, we talk about those very difficult to serve populations who struggle to find stable living situations. That was our whole last conversation, right? I mean, this is that. So reduces costs in all kinds of other departments, probably more than we'll ever find a way to accurately measure. I did have just a few kind of technical questions. The first is, I know you mentioned solar on the roof is not recommended because the array can kind of track with the sun. I imagine, based on what happened when since the library vote last week, that we're going to hear a lot about this too. So could you maybe just help me kind of understand why not the roof that's already an impermeable surface?
So the
why
roof,
not tracking solar on the roof, for example?
Sure. Well, tracking solar on the roof from an engineering standpoint, your cost would be similar to the bridge over the creek at that point, because those things weigh several tons when they get up. But the other part on the roof was how much energy it could gather. And what I should have mentioned, and I apologize for not, where you see these green dots are either in open fields or they're in areas that are going to be impacted by construction. There are 2 or 3 that may be in some areas where we might have to do some trimming, or hopefully we'll be able to move them in such a way that they won't require any trimming. So it looks like we're not taking woods down in this situation. We are simply putting them in an area that's already available for that use, and that open space underneath it will remain for other uses. Football wouldn't be recommended, but for other kinds of activities, walking and exercise, it would work pretty well. So
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, very much so. Thank you. The other question I had, I'm interested in seeing our SPLOST projects talk to each other a little more, so we have this renewable energy project in SPLOST as well. And I'm just wondering if there's already been discussion about this, and then if so, where we might be able to go to, specifically thinking about being EV ready with some of these parking spaces we're putting in. As I understand it, it's cheaper to do that when you're putting it in the first place than to go retrofit it. And, probably over the lifespan of this, we'll see some more electric vehicles in the fleet of Advantage or in the, garages of their employees. And then the other question I had was about other enhancements like around building envelope, wall thickness, window thickness, those sorts of things. Like, can we put funding toward that to help enhance those things beyond what code requires?
Yeah, Keith has the better details because he's the engineer. But I can tell you that all the way along, that's been embedded in the discussion is what can we do to bring that sustainability and energy efficiency. Because the envelope is the best place it's the lowest hanging fruit. We can save more money there than any place else. So let me.
No, Mike hit it right on. That's exactly, everything we've done on design and do on the buildings, we consider that. I mean, the Earthcraft is sort of a guiding document to certify that process. But the whole design has been talked about that energy efficiency and different things that we can do, whether it's higher efficiency air conditioning units or better insulation.
So I guess maybe to clarify my question here, since we have this SPLOST money and this project is an eligible use of that SPLOST money, I'm wondering, in the spirit of we can try to spread that around to more places, but also if we can make one brand new project maximally good, it's still the same net benefit in terms of grid pressure and everything. So I'd rather knock this one out of the park as much as possible, right?
Yeah.
So, could we use that SPLOST 2020 sustainability money to either help pay for how we're already going beyond what's required, or is there further we can go if we were to apply that funding? That's, I guess,
I think at some point you hit a diminishing return on how much you spend on energy efficiency dollar-wise versus what you get back in energy savings. And I think that what we're doing for the Earthcraft, you're pretty close at that point with how we're improving the design as best we can. That's that $185,000 to increase that I mentioned is in the budget to increase the cost over the energy codes. That's trying to achieve some of those things that you mentioned, and that's in our current cost. If we came back and we were $200,000 over budget with our bids, we might say, yeah, Mayor and Commission, could we get that $200,000 from the 2020 Renewable Energy Fund to help pay for those cost increases? That would be an option.
Okay.
Yes, you could, and we had it, and we tossed back and forth whether or not to recommend spending the SPLOST 2020 renewable energy dollars on that 1.2 for solar, or the community energy fund. So the recommendation from staff was to go with the community energy fund, but it could be either or for that solar work.
But that 185 and what's essentially enhancements that completely align with the mission, I mean, could we also pay for that 185? I mean, this project is millions of dollars away from where it needs to be fully realized. So I'm just wondering if we can help with some of the cost using that fund, if it's legitimately related to sustainable goals.
I think that 185,000 extra would legitimately fall within the project statement for that renewable energy project.
Okay, and that's currently just coming out of the SPLOST Project 28, not SPLOST Project 11,
because
right?
at this point, 200,000 wouldn't get us over that next phase, but if that made up the difference to get us to another phase or get another wing or something added when we came back with bids, then we would certainly ask for those dollars to come from that.
And then just last thing, I see Commissioner Myers like ready to go. The EV ready, is that part of what's already happening?
It would be. It's already part of what the plan, and I just didn't mention the amount of time. It would be part of the Earthcraft certification.
So you said
point.
60 spaces. How many of those spaces are?
I don't know if we've identified an exact number. For EV? Yeah, for EV.
Yeah, I haven't seen the numbers yet. Believe me, that's one of the things I keep. What are these? What are these? And one other thing I want to mention, there is that question continually that we discuss internally. Do we try to hit a net zero for one building? Or do we look at the other buildings and say, well, we might hit an 80%, but we're going to bring 40% up to 80. So that is also part of that.
And that part made total sense to me, so I'm not arguing against the calculus you're
No.
recommending generally. I'm just wondering, hey, if we can free up another nearly 200,000 in this project's funding to go towards completing the project by funding the renewable energy components that are already, I'm very glad to hear, a part of it with the renewable energy money in SPLOST, then maybe that would be worth doing, so.
And if there's one way to get to net zero, but generally, you've got a good bit of it you can accomplish at a fairly cost-effective, but when you get down to those final percentage points, it gets real expensive. And that's another thing to think about is, the aggregate versus being able to say that one's zero, that's just part of the discussion too.
Yes.
Carol?
Yeah, this is really important that I bring up, and I'm going to bring it up again and again, because the Inflation Reduction Act has so much money for energy programs and transitional, and the municipal governments and nonprofit organizations can use direct pay, also known as elective pay, to receive a payment equal to the full value of tax credits for clean energy projects, including energy efficiency upgrades, solar, wind, and thermal, electrical vehicle and charging stations. And so I just want to make sure that we are dipping into that. I had this list sent to me I should use when I'm talking to municipal leaders about building energy upgrades, so it seemed an appropriate time.
So a lot of those haven't been defined yet. They're still in the discussion phase. But like, for example, we're aware that all the HVAC systems would qualify. So we will have to come back and ask permission for where to direct any repayments or any rebates that come to Athens-Clarke County toward, and of course, we're going to recommend toward energy as well. So your HVAC system, your solar panels will also qualify for that. We're checking to see if any of the building improvements could qualify. So we are keeping our eye on that because we absolutely want to get that money back.
So in fact, the solar money we're spending on the solar, we could get back some of that through the direct pay. So that's wonderful.
Exactly. Just have to work out that process.
Yeah.
And I just heard last week that, of course, that lovely federal rulemaking that everybody enjoys so much is still underway for this. But one of the things that both the city and the county advocates from the state are doing is encouraging that to hurry up so we can know exactly what that repayment's going to look like.
If I could touch one more real quick on the question about the rooftop solar. So we're showing, the phase one building. Part of, again, for the interest of time, we didn't show, we're talking about putting the mechanical units on the rooftop, and they're standard residential units, but that keeps them from being right outside somebody's bedroom window, keeps them more secure from vandals or theft or weeds and lawnmowers. So the amount of roof space available in phase one is really fairly limited for rooftop solar. And we probably wouldn't realize, based on I don't have the exact number, probably somewhere in less than 10% of the energy usage for the building for rooftop. And then if we knew we had phase 1 and 2 we were doing at the same time, we could maximize, we could look at the cost of rooftop solar on those 2 buildings, even though they're not in the most efficient direction, and reduce the number of arrays and perhaps reduce the cost, and we would do that. But right now, we don't know that phase 2 is going to be funded, so in order to maximize that energy use, the arrays was the way to go. And Mike is right, they are extremely heavy, and to put them on the roof, arrays on the roof for that, would increase the structural cost, and then the wind and tilt from them being not fastened directly to the roof would also be an uplift problem. So.
I have a question that combines an engineering element with a programming element, so Evan may want to speak to that piece of it. And I ask this in the wake of a visit that I just made to the emergency department at Piedmont Athens Regional, where they indicated how difficult it was to find behavioral health support beds in Georgia generally, and we know that to be the case, but they indicated that it's not unusual for them to have to place somebody in Montezuma, Georgia, down on the Flint River, several hours away. So the combination question is, if it was a prospect, could we go 3 stories on these wings? And would that make programming sense for Advantage?
I'll address the engineering portion. Yeah, in theory, it could go 3-story. We'd need to know that now, or else we would adjust, the cost would be different. Fire protection is one thing that is tremendously different, and oddly enough, it actually impacts the site cost. We would be building out a perimeter road around the whole building for fire protection, vehicle access, because we'd be over a height limit that would kick us into that next phase.
I see.
Yeah, we did talk about a 3-story building early on, and that's one reason we reduced it to 2-story, was to cut those costs. You'd add money for elevators, for extra floors. Actually, oddly enough, an elevator per floor is about $100,000 to $150,000 per floor, just by jumping one level. So
that's helpful to know. And I guess, Evan, you may want to address the programming question, even though the engineering element of this may have sealed the deal on the 2-story building.
Well, I just wanted to clarify, you're talking about a 3-story, not additional rooms, but just the overall makeup. Is that what you were talking about?
Well, what I was suggesting is that prospectively, thinking about all the moving pieces here, if we went 3 stories, that increases the number of rooms available for clients.
And well, so from the room increase standpoint, we are looking at sustainability, and we need to be able to maintain the operational funds in order to provide the services for these individuals. Remarkably enough, in looking and projecting for this, we're almost breaking even with the existing monies that we're paying towards utilities, apartment repairs, and rent. That, even by us basically tripling our capacity to do this, we would be able to do it. Now with additional rooms, we would need additional staff and additional support there. And so we're really close. That would be a question that we would need to find additional support dollars moving forward that way in order to sustain the program operationally.
Just operationally. Okay, yeah, I got you. Thank you. All right, everybody, we've got one more. I'm going to take a point of privilege, and we'll take an 8-minute break. I've been here since 4:30, so we're going to get Chief Scarborough set up, and we'll be right back at it. discussion, and then turn it over to the chief. Got some new information about something we've been involved in for a long time, so I'll turn it to you, Blaine.
Thanks, Mayor. And as y'all know, back in 2013, the government entered into a four-way agreement. Well, there were two separate agreements, Athens-Clarke County, Piedmont Regional, and St. Mary's and Oconee County, to help pick up a revenue loss that the ambulance provider was experiencing at the time. And that agreement has persisted to present day, still does. And in that was, it called for an oversight committee. And that has not met regularly, and I think that's well known. And so the hospitals, we've been engaging Piedmont recently to see what was possible. And what we're going to share with you tonight is sort of the concept of where we are now. We think that we believe it's more transparent and it tells a better story, and I won't take any more of the chief's thunder on that. We had intended to come to you pretty quickly with an agenda item to move forward, based on your response tonight. It may not happen in this cycle. The attorney's office has recently reviewed the MOA. We've got to share that back with the hospitals. We have to understand how St. Mary's and Oconee may be involved. So there's some moving parts and pieces, but we wanted to go ahead and share with you what our thoughts were and what Piedmont has embraced, and see if that is a model for us to move forward. And I suspect it'll help us all understand our entire emergency response ecosystem. So with that preamble, I'll turn it over to Chief Scarborough.
Thank you, Manager. So tonight, what I'm going to share with y'all, well, let me stop. So that's it. I'm finished. I'm done. I was promised a fire truck if I finished in 5 minutes, so y'all have a nice evening. We're going to try anyway.
Good job, record.
Really tonight, I just hope to stimulate some thoughts of what is going to be in that MOU and what your expectations are, and some things to think about as it develops, to hopefully do what we all want to do, and that's just continually improve our service delivery to the community. So I don't know if that purpose is really accurate right there. We're not really going to get in the weeds of the MOU. Again, I'm going to share some things with you tonight, some concepts, if you will, potential key performance indicators that I think need to be considered, and some of those indicators we're actually doing ourselves already. We'll talk about some reporting options, and then some standards that I think need to be considered with any of the data or any of the performance you're looking at. So you want to look at something that's already recognized, and so that's really what I intend to share with you tonight. So the manager already alluded to some of this, but the EMS zone provider was awarded to St. Mary's and Piedmont Athens over 20 years ago. In 2008, both of the hospitals decided they wanted to contract with National EMS to provide the ambulance service. The zone provider license still resides with the hospitals, even though they subcontract to National EMS. Then in July of 2013, the MOU was signed. Athens-Clarke County signed the MOU with Piedmont Athens, and Oconee signed one with St. Mary's at the same time. And there was a $100,000 subsidy provided, paid to the hospital each year as part of that agreement. Also part of that agreement was the EMS Oversight Committee. It began meeting in 2013. There were 7 members, 2 from each of the hospitals, 1 from Athens-Clarke County appointed by the mayor, 1 from Oconee County appointed by the Oconee County Board of Commissioners, and 1 member from the public that both hospitals chose. So that's the 7-member Oversight Committee. Well, 2020, as the manager alluded to now, the meetings have become very sporadic, and we have not met in a long time at this point. So information is not flowing, and it's just not functioning. So one of the things that I think is really important for you all to think about in this MOU is, I think we need to approach emergency medical service with a big picture. So when somebody experiences a medical emergency, it's not just what we do, it's not just what the 911 center does, it's not what the hospital does or what National, it's what we all do together. And any part of that sequence there that things don't happen that should, it's going to impact, the outcome for the patient. So we need to be looking at the big picture, and that's what I want to share with you tonight, that what I'm going to share includes all those folks up there, all those agencies, that we look at the big picture, we evaluate ourselves, we evaluate everybody that's involved in this process, because that's how you're going to get better. So here are some thoughts. Again, I'm just trying to plant some ideas at this point of concepts we think will work, and we've had some discussions with the hospital, and I think they're on board with these concepts too, that quarterly reports to the mayor and commission, and I'm going to share with you what we would propose the performance aspects of those reports will look like. A semi-annual, or every 6 months, do a presentation with it. We all come, like all those groups, the 911 Center, us, National, the hospital, we all come and make a presentation to y'all, have some good dialogue about what's going on. The next one, and I'm going to talk about the CARES registry in just a minute, but there's some data there it's a national program that has to do mainly with cardiac arrest, that it's about performance measures. That's what the CARES registry is all about, and I'll talk to you about that. But we're going to have to enter the data, and Piedmont Athens will have to enter the data into that system to get access to the data and to be able to compare ourselves to other communities and other responders and see how we're doing compared to others. So it's going to be us reporting, Athens-Clarke County Fire and Emergency Services. We're going to be providing data. The 911 Center, our 911 Center will be providing data, and then National EMS will be providing data through the hospitals. And we're going to have some specific key performance indicators. And we have structured ours in our discussion with the hospital around 3 areas. One, structure, the system, our EMS system structure. There's some things we need to look at and evaluate with our structure. Secondly, it's system process, and I'm going to get into what these are in a minute. And then lastly, it's clinical care and outcome. So you put those three together, and you get that picture I was talking about, where you have a better idea of how are we all doing and how's the patient doing ultimately at the end of their experience. I will share this with you, that the state, when they determine who the zone provider is going to be, has some key performance indicators they look at, and ours mirrors some of theirs. And here's some of their just headings. So they look at pediatrics, kind of treatment with pediatrics. They look at trauma, cardiac, stroke, and operational process, and then times. And I would share with you that ours are going to mirror some of those. So here's the structure I mentioned, the system structure. So, and I'm not going to read the slide to you, but there's four measures there. The first is, we're talking about our structure. So how many response vehicles do we have? Does National EMS have? We have, all of ours are 24/7, so we don't have any 12-hour trucks, but National does. So that's the structure of our response system. So knowing what our structure is tells us what our capabilities are too. So that's the first one. And then we want to break that first one down by average by location, where they're at, and average by advanced life support versus basic life support. And there's a level of treatment that goes up, and I think y'all have been talking about some of that, and I think you know what I'm talking about there. But advanced life support, you can do more treatments and be more aggressive with your treatment. So we want to know those things. The second item up there, system saturation, is exactly what it means. It's when we get overwhelmed. Our system gets overwhelmed. We have 2 car crashes with 15 patients, and we're taxed. National EMS is taxed, and even the ER can get taxed with some of those numbers. We need to know when those things happen, because when you dig down into that data and you see there was a 15-minute response time, and it happened when we had 2 huge car wrecks and we were stretched for resources, that's why that happened. So there can be a logical reason, and it gives context to the data too. But I think that's really important for us, all of us, to know that. The third one is what percent is advanced life support versus basic life support, and that's on National EMS. And then the last one is the coverage zones. Again, we're looking for the structure. So how are the coverage zones set up? We can show the ones for our fire stations, and we want National to show theirs where they're putting the ambulances and what coverage zone they're providing. So it helps us understand the structure. So the second set of performance indicators has to do with process, and it starts with our 911 center. And NFPA 1225 has specific requirements, and that's what's up in the description column over there, that you're trying to shoot for that. So you want to answer that call within 10 seconds 90% of the time. Now that sounds easy, but if they're stretched staff-wise and the phones are ringing, those folks do a great job over there, but they sometimes really get stretched. Think about some of the storms that come through, and it just becomes almost overwhelming. So that's what they aim for, and they hit close to that. I don't know what the percent of the time is, but that's one of the measures. Again, we're measuring us as well as national EMS and the hospital. Total response time. It's turnout time, we want to know, and travel time. Turnout time is when we get the call till the time we get on the fire truck and we're rolling out the ramp. That's our turnout. And then travel is from the ramp to the emergency scene. So we want to know those times, and we ask about the mean and the 90th percentile, because that's what's in the NFPA 1710 standard, the 90th percentile. The next one is non-transports, where they respond and they don't transport. We like to know how many times do they go to scenes and they don't transport somebody. That tells us kind of the opposite of that too. What percent of the time do they end up transporting somebody to the hospital on these calls? And then concurrent incidents, that goes back to what I mentioned on the other slide. It's really, we're asking it another way. Tell us how many times, you had 3 or more incidents working at the same time, because that's going to impact service delivery. And then the last one, chief complaints, it's just trying to break down, what are we actually responding to? Is it chest pain? Is it somebody having a seizure? Is it somebody with trauma, cut, stabbed, whatever it might be, to give y'all a picture of what actually the top 10 calls we're responding on. You know what's happening out there with our responses. And then the last set of key performance indicators is clinical care and outcome. And I mentioned at the beginning, the emergency and the outcome starts with the person that walks up, because if somebody walks up and they know CPR, if they know how to control bleeding, if there's an AED by and they use that AED, that's going to affect the outcome. And we're not capturing that right now. We need to know that. Also, if our 911 center talks them through CPR, that's a good thing. We want to know that's happening and how many times it's happening. So, but back to bystander CPR, and this is part of the CARES registry, which again I'm going to get into in just a second, but we'll both report that. We'll report, and National EMS will report how many times somebody started CPR before we ever got there. We hope it's a lot, but I can tell you it's not. And then bystander AED. Do they know what AED is? Do they know how to use it? And then the Houston Survival is the CARES registry system, and it's 26 pieces of data. And in the sake of time, maybe I can still save that fire truck. I'm not going to go through all that data, but it's all about factors related to cardiac arrest that goes from the scene to treatment to transport to what the hospital does. But it's 26 data elements that the CARES registry requires as a basic requirement. And then, as I mentioned, CPR instructed by our 911 center. They're implementing the emergency medical dispatch right now. One of the things they can do now is if someone's there and willing to try, they can talk them through how to do compressions only CPR, which can make a huge difference. So we want to know that. If it's not happening, we also want to know why it's not happening too, both sides of it. And then, CPR performed. So how many times did we perform CPR when we responded? So those are some of those key performance indicators that we want to get into. So let me stop just a minute and talk about what the CARES registry is. So CARES stands for Cardiac Arrest Registry to Enhance Survival. If you go look, you're going to see that the survival in the country with cardiac arrest is really low. And if you don't focus on this, you're not going to change that number. So that's something we have to do. It started back in 2005. It operates under the guidance of the Emory University, and it covers an area of about 175 million people. That's how many folks they're evaluating. There's 29 statewide registries. Unfortunately, Georgia's not one of those. Hopefully that's coming soon. And there are also 60 additional communities within 17 states, and I heard even today that number's gone up. More than 2,300 EMS agencies use it, and then more than 2,500 hospitals use the CARES registry. And in Georgia, City of Atlanta, Gwinnett County, DeKalb County, Fulton County, and Cherokee County are using it. And I had some discussions with a couple of those jurisdictions to see how it was doing, and they seem to be very pleased with not the work, because it's more work, but what it was doing for them to figure out how they could get better. So the next step's not really approve the MOU, but I think you're going to have some discussions about what goes in that MOU, and there's some questions that have got to be clarified. But after you get to the point where you have got the MOU at the place where you want to approve it and want to get it in place, then I do want you to know, so there's a $1,500 cost for the fire department annually to be part of the CARES registry. I think it's worth that. That's for what we can get out of the data. I think it's very valuable. And then both us and the hospital will do registry training. We'll start entering that CARES data monthly. It has to be entered monthly. It'll only be probably about 15 to 20 calls a month for us that's specifically tied to cardiac arrest for CARES. And then all of us are going to be tracking those performance indicators and then doing the quarterly reports and then doing the presentations. So let me stop there and see if I can answer any questions. Or
And Blaine, you want to set the stage?
Well, sure, and I just, as I said, there's more work to be done. Both Attorney Drake and I will be sharing with you in the near future, but there's more conversations to be had. But we wanted to present the concept to you today. And I do want to point out that in the current agreement, there is only one performance indicator. And you might speak to that. What was that in the current one? The response time, the median response time.
it's the median response time on emergency calls.
So the innovations here, if you will, there are more performance indicators. It tells a bigger story, and it recognizes the symbiotic nature of our agency, the hospital, and the ambulance. So we feel like this is an improvement. We feel like it'll be transparent. I think it will help to show, because we're going to be objective. We didn't pick those because those are all things that we score well in. And we can all see together. Everybody knows our folks are trying their best, but we may not be doing our best for certain reasons, whether it's resources or staffing. But it allows you to see that and ask, informed questions of us and for us to respond to you. And there may be things that it uncovers that we need to improve together. So, thank you, Mayor.
All right, start with Carol, and I'll get everybody around the room.
Oh, you starting with me, huh?
Yep.
Okay, well, good. I'm going to cut out the questions that aren't as important here. This is great. I mean, this is moving forward in a really great direction, so I'm very excited about that. I think there'll be a lot more, it'll be clearer what's going on and how we can improve the situation as well. Very concrete, specific suggestion that I would really love to see. I think our community needs to see it. And it's something that we will work towards. And that is, you have the basic life support and the advanced life support, but you do not have the paramedics. And I think, we're talking about cardiac arrest, and, that's, I want to know, I'd love there would be a paramedic if I went if I had a heart attack, because that's what's really going to make a difference for me if there's a paramedic. And I know that's something we're working to, but yet if we don't have these baseline numbers, we're not going to get there. We have our new EMS oversight person on your staff, and I know we'll be working in there. So the paramedic is really important to get in there. I was really surprised to find out just this past week that Oglethorpe and Madison County, all of the ambulances that go out there have paramedics. And so the paramedics are the ones who can do almost as much as a lot of people in the emergency room can do. I'm always learning. So anyway, that's one thing. I would love to also see the numbers of, the daily numbers of ambulances and the percentage with paramedics. And I think that's probably something your EMS captain would want to be knowing anyway. And if somehow we could get that incorporated in, and at least make sure the EMS captain is getting that. And then the numbers on the non-emergency transports for EMS, for national as well. Some other people might mention this here. I do think this will come up in someone else's comments, but lately it's getting a lot of traction that national is out of network for a lot of insurance providers here in Athens. And I actually called my insurance company and they were like, you know, and I asked about all the counties around and they were like, oh, you're in network. I said, how about national? Out of network. And that was for the state insurance person, the state insurance that I had. And then maybe, this is really not about this one, but the knowing a little bit more, getting update from the manager's office and the police department about the status of the 9/11 emergency center and the staffing. And I believe the goal in that old option 4, which probably no one understands anymore, but was to get it so that all police, fire, and EMS calls were there, you know, connected from beginning to end. And that would give us such great data too. So those are my things. I will follow up and put them in an email as well.
If there's anything, Chief, you want to immediately respond to, or just take that in?
I'm just taking it in.
Okay.
Okay.
Patrick?
Yes, Dr. Myers, I thought you were going around, but Dr. Myers asked a lot of my question, but one other question I had was do we have to do an MOU with Oconee County as well, or that's just for the oversight committee?
Well, in the past, and the attorney can probably speak to that better than I can, in the past, our agreement was just with Piedmont Athens.
Well, but it did have St. Mary's and Oconee County as a signatory on it. And at the time, and that's one of the first things I worked on, I think the reason for that, you know, obviously for good coordination and communication, and to make sure that every party was paying its fair share. And so we can explore, and Attorney Drake has given some good suggestions on how that might be structured if all 4 parties are still involved. It could be that this would just be us and Piedmont, but those are the types of things that aren't allowing us to come forward quite yet, but we wanted to go ahead and share the concept.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, Patrick answered my question, but I do want to stress what Commissioner Myers talked about with the out-of-network thing, which is really unusual. You know, all the other counties are in network. A lot of us in Clarke County are not. And again, I'm not sure how we can make that happen in part of that MOU. I mean, maybe the attorney can help us with that, but it's just, you know, say me retired from UGA and I'm out of network with Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Right.
That's just, I don't know. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, we got a phone call today from someone who was upset about their ambulance bill, and we had to let them know, we didn't bill you, you'll need to talk to the hospital.
Right. And I think that brings up another point. So, you know, somebody out there, we might have got the same email. They're less than 3 miles from the hospital and they got a $2,000 bill. So, yeah.
Jesse?
Thanks. So encouraged by this. Thank you. As someone who's been serving on this non-existent committee since I took office, first alongside Commissioner Davenport and then alongside Commissioner Myers, only in the theoretical realm, this is awesome. And better, less meetings for us except for the one that we're already in. So I wholeheartedly echo every remark so far shared by colleagues and echo the curiosity of every question. I did want to kind of lean in. I missed maybe part of what Commissioner Myers said, so maybe I'm just redundant here. But the zone licenses. Okay, yeah. In my mind, we got to get the zone license. So whatever staff can provide in terms of information around that, that to me seems like a key point in all this. And then the other thing I just wanted to clarify, it's kind of there's like 2 little details just to understand what's in this slideshow. One is, it says that Piedmont and the fire department are going to feed into that CARES data, but it doesn't say that National would. Is there a reason why we wouldn't have them also feed into this database?
Because the data that the hospital is going to put in is going to be part of that ambulance information that they collect.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there will, to answer your question, there will be information from National's care, but it's going to be entered by the hospital.
Okay. I guess the only thing I want to make sure we do from like a legal perspective is make sure we require them to provide that information so it does get
Yes.
in. So, since they're not listed in this, but this is obviously not the contract, And then the other thing I wanted to clarify was the alarm processing time, and we have these markers around like 90% of calls will be an X amount of time. And I'm just curious about that other 10%. Do we define like a bare minimum that every call has to meet, or can some calls take hours? Should we have some kind of backstop that says, our target metric is 90% of calls are at this, but also 100% of calls will be no longer than this longer thing or something?
That hasn't been an issue for us. I hear what you're saying, though,
Yeah.
but that might be a overall, maybe overall arching requirement for all of us to say a response time requirement, maybe.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that insofar as our attorney's office thinks it's something we can build into the agreement. So.
And Manager Williams, can you speak a little bit?
Basically, so we have these kind of performance indicators that are currently being expressed in the slideshow, and it's built around some pretty good marks, I think, short response times for 90% of calls. And I'm wondering if we can also build in as like a backstop, a bare minimum requirement for all calls, that like there needs to be a certain amount of rapidity for any given call.
I'd be careful about anything 100% as a requirement in a contract where the cure is to suspend service, because things happen, and I don't know if you can ever get 100% all the time unless it's an extremely low bar, and then I'm not sure what you're trying to achieve.
And maybe that would beg the question then, like, what are the repercussions if there is one missed call or something? But, the worry I have is if we really have these issues, if we have non-emergency transports keeping our fleet down, are they basically going to make sure to hit the 90% and then the other 10% end up being like real slow at peak
Well,
times?
that assertion's been made. I've yet to see the data on that. And I'd also like to speak to the zone license.
And without trying to make that assertion, I guess what I'm saying is, can we just build in something into the contract that would prevent that from being the case? But
Currently the agreement provides that in the event that ARMC, that was Athens Regional, now it's been changed to, I think, Piedmont, and St. Mary's shall fail to meet the hospital obligations, including without limitation the failure to provide EMS services in a manner consistent with applicable law and regulation or the standard of care described therein, then Athens-Clarke County shall furnish notice of such deficiency to ARMC, and ARMC shall have 60 days to cure such deficiency or cause EMS service providers to cure such deficiency. And then in the event that they shall fail to cure such deficiency or to have such deficiency cured, then such failure shall be deemed to be a default hereunder, and Athens-Clarke County shall have the right to terminate this agreement upon giving 10 days prior written notice. So that is something that's in the current agreement. It doesn't speak, though, to specified standards. I think it might be, as long as they're providing the level of care required under law, I think you couldn't require more strict than that. I would say, and I'm going to have Sherry, we've done a memo before for Mayor and Commission. I thought it went out to everybody. It may have been before you got on the commission about this. The zone license is controlled by the state, I think the State Board of Health, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And so we can't just take over that zone license. It would have to be, I think we might, you'll get the memo. I think we could petition, but there has to be a hearing and all. It's a very complicated process. It really is not. So what we're basically doing under this agreement, we're just providing $100,000 in funding along with Oconee County. But even if we didn't provide that $100,000 a year, the hospital still have those zone licenses. They still have to provide the EMS service.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess where I'm going with that is, I did get that memo.
You did?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I think where I'm going with that is, given that it is kind of a lengthy process that we'd have to decide we wanted to undergo, I am currently suggesting that I think that would be worthwhile for us to pursue as like part of a long-term vision. But if I am alone in the room in that assertion, so be it. I'm just throwing that out there.
And Manager Williams, just having in some other jurisdictions, it may be helpful to get some perspective on.
Well, a couple things. One is that if the end goal is for us to run the ambulance service, that is an extremely expensive proposition. The second thing is with the zone license, and I'll ask the chief to clarify, but my understanding is you just don't go request and get. They would have to put it out to bid. You could end up with a totally different ambulance provider who holds the zone license, Hospitals don't have any control. Governments have no control. That would be a risk in the process that you would take. Is that correct?
That's correct. Typically, the state won't open a zone provider license without cause, too. You got to give them, somebody's got to provide them cause for them to even open it. And then when they open it, what they ask is licensed ambulance providers to compete. We don't have a license right now, so that'd be a big hurdle for us to overcome to convince the state to let us have the license. But then they review that, and then the state makes a decision and awards the license. But again, I'll go back to it. They're looking for cause, so there'd have to be some cause that they feel like is cause to open it up, and then there's no guarantee we would get it.
And I'll share, while I know it's cold comfort to those of us who have constituents who were authentically and deeply worried about in terms of their care and level of service. Around the state, we're, and this is probably a sad fact, but we're probably relatively well situated compared to particularly South Metro Atlanta and South Georgia. Those are the places where there are dramatic stories out there that are, regular hours-long waits. So just want to provide a little bit of statewide context there in terms of how some other jurisdictions might view us in a somewhat favorable light, even though, of course, we know that we want to see a better standard of care. And I think that was the root of your question about the 100% coverage versus the 90. How do we ensure quality standards of care comprehensively? So that's how I take that. A couple of the folks, Allison?
Yeah, I've lost track of where I was in the lineup, so thank you. I really like this, and I really appreciate the indicators. Can we go back to the indicators?
Absolutely.
Slide. And because when you look at it, the next one. Yeah. Well, how many were, the one that says bystander CPR at the top.
The last one.
There we go.
There we go.
So this is showing that where on a 911 call, staff are helping a bystander who's there giving the first aid.
Yes.
As well, and then we're documenting the instruction from 911 and who performed it. So this is a huge improvement over what we have now, and I'm not sure, Carol, maybe we can talk tomorrow. I want to understand why this isn't enough of who's doing it. And I think your CARES registry system data is awesome. I'm glad that, I think that $1,500 is very fair and reasonable to be involved with that. But I think that it shows that how, and again, we're talking about cardiac arrest, so we're talking defibrillator, which is on our high school campuses. They're out places, but somebody still is on 911 asking for help for that. And then, as well as the chest compressions. But these are the numerous ways it's happening, and you're going to have data now for us to understand how much of that's happening in these different scenarios, which I think is just outstanding. And then I have a question about trying to have an idea of Narcan and its use. Since that's a supply, we don't have to have that as an indicator listed because you know how many you buy and you go through, right? So these are actions.
Yes.
Action indicators versus supplies.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
We need a defibrillator in here. We'll never know.
On each wall. Tiffany?
Right behind me.
It's really not a question. Thank you, Chief, for bringing this before us. I know my friend Bob and Sam is going to be very happy because I've learned a lot.
Yes, ma'am.
About this, and so I'm going to email them when I get home and say, hey, did you watch? We covered it. So thank you, because they are very passionate about this.
Yes, they are.
And so thank you for listening. Thank you, Manager Williams, for listening to them, because I know they came before you last fall about it. And so thank you for listening. And they thought they were hitting a brick wall, but they got somewhere. So thank y'all.
Alyssa.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I appreciate
Yes,
this.
ma'am.
And I'm looking forward to seeing some of this, clear data that brings some more accountability to this private service. I am not interested in signing on to an MOU that for an agency that does not cover a significant portion of our population, does not have insurance coverage. So I'm hoping that in this MOU, we can somehow like make that, you know, part of one of the qualifications for even signing it. I have a question about this oversight committee. It says that it's a 7-member committee and 5 of 7 of the members are appointed by the hospitals. Yet we had 2 commissioners serving on it. Did the makeup of that committee change at some point?
It did. The commission kind of took it upon itself to appoint another member.
Okay. I mean, I'd like to see, you know, a new makeup of that committee addressed in the MOU.
Well, in the MOU, what will take the place of this committee, where folks can't really see what's going on, will be presentations in this chamber, as well as reports, and all of this posted online.
Okay,
So
so
people can see
the
it.
committee itself will go away. There will be public presentations of reports.
That's what's being proposed.
Okay. Yeah, so I'd also like to see a little more cross-reference data. We talk about system saturation, you know, maybe being a reason for some of the shortfalls, and I'm wondering if we can cross-reference that with an uptick in car wrecks in recent years. I'd like to see, you know, if those red lights come on for saturation times when, you know, an EMS call didn't make it in time, if that's a reason. But yeah, I'm just really perturbed. I mean, I live literally like a couple 100 yards from the hospital, and my insurance no longer covers an ambulance ride there. And, you know, if I were to go into cardiac arrest, it would cost me $3,000 to get to the hospital, which is literally, I can see from my backyard. So, and I know there are people who are reluctant to call an ambulance now because they know it's not covered. How many lives are going to be lost because, you know, folks decide to get in the backseat of the Buick and drive to the hospital rather than call an ambulance? And I'm sure it stresses out our firefighters too, who arrive on the scene and undoubtedly are going to face situations where someone does not want to get in that ambulance. I can see the trauma that can happen there. So this is a problem I feel like we as a local government have to speak to and address, and you know, this is the sole provider of this service in our community, and we need to put some pressure on them to make sure that they do whatever they do to make amends with Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and maybe we talk to the folks in Oconee County too, because if Athens-Clarke County isn't covered, there are folks who live in Oconee County who are certainly shopping and working in Athens that might end up in a car wreck and need that hospital ride. So, you know, we need to do whatever we can to pressure this service to bring that coverage back.
I'll just say we're about to close, but I'll share with everyone interested in compelling national to accept commonly available insurance carriers. I think we all know about this notion of surprise billing, and probably many of us have had a slip or fall into the emergency room, and then you get multiple bills because there's something from the anesthesiologist and something from the doctor provider and something directly from the hospital. We know in America the most common rationale for bankruptcy is medical debt, and so we don't want to encourage that in this community. I asked one writer if he could send me the photograph of the bill. I just wanted to see what that looked like and to see a multiple $1,000 line item for a very short ride. Shocking. So anyhow, thanks everybody for your input. Chief, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Manager Williams, Attorney Drake. Thanks everybody on the commission. Hope you have a great night, and we will see you tomorrow with the Clarke County School Board.
Move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn from Commissioner Houle. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Taylor. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
What time tomorrow night? 6.